Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Ready to learn about the tip? How many of you have had a tip project or been through the tip process? We got three. Okay, so we got a lot of people who are new to the tip. That's great. That's what this is designed for, and we're really happy to have you here. We're really excited to talk about this. So before we get started today, Rich Bilski from District 5 is going to talk a little bit about project development, and I'm still waiting for my thing to upload. So I don't know if you want to come up here so they can see you on the Zoom link. And then we'll get everything
going. Hi, everyone. I want to welcome everybody from the SRPEDD RPA and surrounding region. My name's Rich Bilski. I'm the new District 5 Project Development Engineer. Took over this July. So it's one of the biggest regions in the state, road mileage and number of cities and towns. This is a timely meeting to go over the tip process, considering the importance of this workshop as we're getting ready to meet with all the regions in preparation for readiness days coming up this February. So we can begin to develop the next tip cycle. The readiness days is going to be 3 days in February. So it's going to be the 5th, 6th, and 7th. And we'll meet initially with all the regions to check in the readiness of the different projects for the FY 2024-2028 and potential projects for 2029. Unfortunately, I wanted to be able to stay for the whole presentation, but we have PRC meeting today in about a little over an hour, so I'll have to leave to go to that. So, but where's Jackie? So, Jackie.
My presentation is still uploading, but I think I'm just going to go through like a brief overview of what we're going to be doing today. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the TIP process in general, and I'm also going to talk about how we evaluate and rank TIP projects. Derek Schuster from the Office of Transportation Planning is here. He's going to talk to you about the MPO process, how projects get on the TIP, how and what he calls the color of funding or different funding categories. It's really like a deep, help you get a deep understanding of the background of the TIP. We have Pamela Marquis from Right of Way. She's going to talk to you about that process, which we've heard from our communities is something that they really want to learn more about. And we have Alex LaMarche. He's going to be virtual, talking about the environmental permitting process. I think that we are actually going to have Derek go first. His and my presentations actually complementing each other. I do want you to know a couple things about the TIP first before we get into it. If you are brand new to the TIP is a 5-year capital investment plan that communities can apply to use funding through. There's regional target and statewide target, which I'm sure Derek's going to talk more about, but SRPEDD, the agency I work for, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Jackie Jones. I'm the Assistant Director of Transportation Planning over there. What we do is we help communities develop projects, and then we work with them to get them onto the TIP. I will talk more about that application process and what you need to do to get ready for that in my presentation. But for now, there's regional target funds, about $24 million per year. That's what we have control over. And then there's a whole pot of statewide funding that Derek will explain much better than I can. And what SRPEDD has control over is the regional target. And a lot of what we will cover today is dealing with that regional pot of funding. So I'm going to turn it over to Derek now. Sorry for the confusion of the agenda, but you're in good hands. Yeah, oh, I'm so sorry.
And Andrea.
We have Andrea Duarte from SRPEDD. She's our public engagement specialist. She's got a great presentation on how you can engage your communities in the TIP process. Sorry about that, Andrea.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jackie, for the introduction. Again, my name is Derek Schuster. I am the STIP coordinator at MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning. I'm hoping folks on the Zoom are able to see this as well. It should be. So this morning I wanted to just give a brief overview of the metropolitan planning organizational structure in Massachusetts, what 3C planning is and why it matters. STIP 101. If you ever hear me or anyone use the term STIP or TIP interchangeably, just the State Transportation Improvement Program, it ropes up all of the regional TIPs into a STIP document. And then lastly, STIP development process and funding. We get a lot of questions about the funding. I've been at MassDOT now for 5 years, and only recently, I'd say in the last year, finally got a full, wholesome grasp of it. Takes a few cycles, and it doesn't help that our federal partners keep making new funding sources available with all of the different rules attached. So I'm going to be happy to be your resource along with SRPEDD staff on explaining how funding works for projects. So beginning, a metropolitan planning organization is an elected body or a member of that, and a body of elected officials and other leaderful stakeholders in your regions, including MassDOT, Highway Administrator, and Secretary of Representation. There's usually a representative from your RTA or RTA's advisory board. In Southeast Mass's case, you have 2 RTAs who I believe have a seat or participate in the MPO process. Departments of Public Works and mayoral representation or different elected officials will participate in the transportation decision-making body for the MPO. There are 10 MPOs in Massachusetts, as well as 3 transportation planning organizations that we treat as if they're MPOs. All of these MPOs are staffed by the regional planning agencies that cover the same geographic boundaries, more or less. And MPOs annually decide on transportation system investment using their allocation of federal funds into a 5-year regional transportation improvement program. When we talk about transportation improvements, we're talking about surface transportation, specifically highway investments or transit investments. When I talk about funding later in this, I'm going to talk principally about highway funding, and that includes funding for bicycle and pedestrian project investment, safety improvements, of course, interstate pavement, non-interstate pavement, bridge projects, basically anything not transit that's surface transportation. I mentioned 3C transportation planning process. This is a federally created term from around the time that MPOs became a policy directive in order to program and spend federal funds. It stands for cooperative, comprehensive, and continuing. Transportation planning is a cooperative process. MPOs decide annually on transportation investments using their allocation of federal funds into their regional 5-year TIPs. How we engage with stakeholders is dictated by public participation plans that MPO staff collaborate with you and other stakeholders to develop. But if there's an important takeaway about this first C of the 3C process, every person has a role in transportation planning. So if people can shout out what your professions are, like what you do you work for Department of Public Works? Can you raise your hand? Do you work for the Highway District? Are you a town manager or work for a town? Do you work for a regional planning agency? Are you a right-of-way official? Are you an environmental analyst or planner? Are you a transportation planner at a state office of transportation planning? Are you a school teacher? Are you a child? Are you a person who has to get to the pharmacy or from point A to point B? Whatever your need is. We all use our transportation networks and therefore have a say and a role in what types of projects we see. So it's important to remember that this is cooperative and not a formality or just one person saying we should do this, put a pin in it. So everyone should always remember, listen to each other and try to work to problem solve. This process is incredibly comprehensive. I'm sorry for that. It's not because of me. It's not because of SRPEDD. It's because of our federal partners, really. But it's a very comprehensive process. The items that land in a TIP should be informed by goals and visions laid out in regional transportation plans. These are also known as long-range transportation plans or metropolitan plans. MPOs develop these plans every 4 to 5 years. SRPEDD actually completed development of their long-range transportation plan for the next 20-plus year outlook just this past summer. So as you identify transportation improvements you want to make in your community, or you're just wondering what types of projects should we be coming up with, those long-range transportation plans are an important reference to look at. And hopefully you all participated in the development of that document as well, so that cooperatively your goals and the region's goals more closely align. The state is also in the process of updating its long-range transportation plan known as Beyond Mobility. I think Jackie's going to share this slide with anyone here today later, so you can hit any of the hyperlinks I have in here to learn more about these different planning documents. The planning tasks that MPO staff perform are identified in their Unified Planning Work Programs, or UPWP for short, and this includes technical assistance and data analysis for communities. So I always encourage municipalities to work closely with their regional planning agency partners because they're rock stars and they do a tremendous amount of collaboration with you or have the capacity to do planning work with and for you as spelled out in their Unified Planning Work Programs. If there's research or planning studies or safety audits that you need performed, they're the ones that you should coordinate with, and our office will coordinate with the region to make sure that those get captured as part of their planning work. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the prioritized investments of the 13 regions in the Commonwealth, along with statewide priorities, make up our State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP. There's a number of other different planning deliverables we have, but those are the big ones. And finally, this is a continuing process. Whether we're replacing transit vehicles at the end of their useful life or identifying places for complete street investments, all transportation work is ongoing. Just last week, I was talking with SRPEDD staff about ways to identify small investments that could be made on recently completed projects from maybe the last 5, 10, 15 years that were designed a while ago when we still thought that sharrows were a best practice for bicycle safety, whereas now we know better design guidance is to have a protected facility or a completely separate facility for someone walking or biking. So we are constantly learning new things about ways to optimize our transportation assets. Just because we do a project today doesn't mean we won't have to replace it or optimize it 15, 20, 40, 50 years from now. So it's important to remember that. And it's also great job security for all of us because there's always work to do. So how do we want to handle questions, by the way? Should I pause and ask, or should I wait till the end? If anyone has questions at any point, do you just want to raise your hand or chime in on the Zoom? Cool. Okay. Hearing none. For TIPS in the Commonwealth, these are a federally required investment program that span 5 years and lists all federally funded projects within an MPO region. TIPS are multimodal and include roadway, bicycle, pedestrian, and transit projects. The funding is limited, so communities need to advance projects for consideration, but be mindful that it's a fiscally constrained document, which I'll talk a little more about later. And we develop our TIPS every spring. So as Richard had given the teaser for, MassDOT hosts an event every February called TIP Readiness Days, where we look at the status of projects that are currently programmed for the current 5-year TIP cycle to see, looking in the crystal ball, are they realistically deliverable at the time we thought they were when we developed our TIP? Or are any of them ahead of schedule? Or unfortunately, more realistically, are there design hangups or right-of-way challenges or town meeting schedules that have delayed the process? And therefore, we can't program this project in 24 anymore. It's realistically a 25 project or a 26 project. Readiness Days informs that decision or recommendation. It's not, when the MPO staff present that at their February and March MPO board meetings explaining TIP development scenarios and readiness dates, it's all the cooks in the kitchen giving their best knowledge at the moment on a project. So I like to encourage municipalities at this point, if you work for one, to stay on top of your designers, or if you're working with a design consultant on a project that's currently TIP programmed or is initiated, but you want to program on the TIP, the more we know in advance of this TIP readiness meeting every year, the better decision we can make, a recommendation we can make for the earliest programmable year for a project. So in addition to that, MPO staff prepare transportation evaluation criteria that they look at for all projects. They see, does this align with our regional transportation planning goals? Does this further safety goals? Or is this an economically productive investment? Or does this hurt the environment? And do we need to reevaluate this project, or whatever those goals are that a region sets? That's how they prioritize projects on their readiness list. Then, of course, they look at the funding availability to ultimately funnel through what the projects are, what goals they hit, when they're ready, and how much funding is available to land on a 5-year TIP program and schedule. As I mentioned, the STIP ropes in all 13 regional planning TIPs into one statewide document, which I and my team submits to our federal partners for their review and concurrence, not only for highway investments, but also for transit investments. And we also have a system of action procedures that happen throughout an active year. So we're currently in federal fiscal year 2024. If you have a project program this year that's set to advertise in June, but it's currently at 100% design and getting to that final design PS&E status, and its cost has increased 20% due to inflation or a minor scope change, that requires going before an MPO board for a TIP amendment. So if you've ever attended an MPO board meeting, I'm kind of the Grinch and always have TIP actions that I help queue up with all of the regions, including SRPEDD. And with how big Southeast Mass is and how many projects we have both on the regional and statewide programs, there are always going to be STIP actions throughout the year in this region and others. This is kind of a nice precursor. Take a picture of this slide or a screenshot of this slide if you're attending online, because it kind of sets up what you're going to hear more about today. This is how projects get developed. If your community identifies a project need, you can submit a project need form through the Massachusetts Project Intake Tool, or MAPIT, that goes to District 5. Alternatively, you can reach out to MPO staff at SRPEDD and they can assist you with that process if you're new to it, or you can reach out to Barbara and Rich at D5 and they will assist you with it. I use the term hand-holding a lot. Like, we're happy to hold hands, especially if you're new in your role and just learning to navigate this process. It's comprehensive. But the key thing is identifying a project need has to happen first before we can develop a project according to the rest of the schedule. MPO staff can also identify through a planning study whether or not there's a project need that may exist in your community, or across several communities, like a corridor study that they're performing that spans one or more communities. And that's something that I imagine they would coordinate closely with you on. Once a project's been initiated, the district can provide guidance for project planning. And MPO staff similarly can provide that technical assistance I was mentioning earlier. If you need assistance with traffic count, data collection, or a road safety audit performed, or any other services, transportation planning related services. It's an important dialogue that you have with your regional planning staff. The district receives the project scope from MappIt, as well as all ancillary information that they receive through that, and goes to the milestone event that's happening today. Happens a few times a year, called Project Review Committee, or PRC. It's at that time where we determine whether or not the projects that have been initiated are eligible for design funding, or to set up a project ID for and further along. It's occasional that sometimes projects need a little more information or homework before they're ready to be PRC initiated. So it might be postponed or delayed to a future PRC meeting. And if you receive guidance or direction from your district on that, just work with them to find out how the project can be furthered along, so that if it still continues to be a need, it gets to that point of getting PRC approval. Once a project receives PRC approval, the Highway Division oversees project design and permitting for these projects. Pre-25% project scoping meeting is held if applicable. I understand that doesn't happen for every project type. Hopefully the district can explain more on that. And as projects are in design, they hit different thresholds of design milestones. Pre-25%, 25% design, 75% design, 100% design, and final design / PS&E. When we're developing the TIP, especially if you're looking to have something programmed in the nearest year, so we're currently in year 1 of the TIP, 2025 is going to be year 2. We really want to see projects at that 75%, 100% final design status. When projects languish and you don't see design progress on them, it's very difficult for MPO staff and board members to recommend programming it or advancing it any earlier in the TIP cycle. So that's just an important note for our municipal partners. When you initiate projects, it's critical to make sure that progress happens on your projects for them to continue being feasible for TIP programming. Assuming that they progress in design, that there's funding available, that the project is consistent with planning goals, and that the region's able to create a fiscally constrained TIP with your project in it, the project can be endorsed by your MPO board, therefore funded, and it can break ground for construction or advertise for construction in the year that it's programmed on the TIP. And bravo, that's what we work toward. That's the goal, that's the dream. A lot of other things have to happen to get to that process. And again, you're going to hear more about that later today, so I won't steal anyone else's thunder on the steps 4 and 3, but 5 and 6, that's the goal we try to get to. Our CIP and STIP development schedule, Massachusetts has the MassDOT CIP. The STIP is a subset of that. The CIP as a whole is a cash flow document explaining all of the investments that the state is making. Because the STIP is a federal aid program, but the majority of projects have state match associated with them, the STIP is part of the CIP. And because the CIP has to be updated annually, we update our STIP annually as well. So even though it's a 5-year document, we go through this development exercise according to this timeline every year to align with our CIP development. I'd already talked a little about tip readiness days coming in February. At the end of January, MassDOT and FHWA and FTA provide fiscal guidance to our MPO and TPO partners on developing their tips, their unified planning work programs. Last year, for the development of their long-range plans, we provided guidance on that as well. MPO staff following tip readiness days will share the outcomes of readiness days with their boards, as well as reach out to stakeholders. I believe you have an advisory committee that would. How many of you participate in Southeast Masses? It's not an advisory committee. What do you call it? JTBG. Thank you. Yeah. So if you participate in the JTBG meetings, that February meeting is a critical time to get the first taste of, okay, what's ready and deliverable and how you're going to go about developing scenarios for your tip. In March, or by March, you will receive a list of the statewide priority projects, including ones that are in the Southeast Mass region, which in some cases might be some weight off of your shoulders. In other cases might mean you have to make some tough decisions about what to fund with your regional target allocation, which I'll talk about in a little. The MPO boards determine that final preferred project list in March. Staff do a QA and QC of everything that's been performed through that point, and then release a draft tip document for public comment in April. Assuming there are few comments or incorporating any comments that are received, MPOs endorse their tips at their May MPO board meetings, and then final fiscal constraint analysis is performed for all tips in the Commonwealth, including Southeast Mass, as well as MassDOT board approval of the CIP and STIP before we send it to our federal partners for their concurrence. How is the STIP built? This is where I'm going to talk about money. I apologize if this puts you to sleep. When I talk about money, the three words I want you, or phrases I want you to remember, are apportionments, obligation authority, and redistribution. Apportionment is formula-based funding that our federal partners make available as established by the bipartisan infrastructure law legislation passed by Congress in 2022. It's also known as the Investment in Jobs and Infrastructures Act. Yeah. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but we call it BIL, B-I-L. In 2024, Massachusetts received about $837 million of BIL apportionment for all the different highway funding programs, the formula core funding programs. Base obligation authority is the percentage of our apportionment that we're allowed to spend, that we can obligate. It's established by Congress every year and is roughly 89%. As I'll show in the next slide, we've used a 90% rolling year average over the last 5 years. So basically, we assume we're going to have about 90% of our apportionment available to program each year as we develop our STIP. And then finally, redistribution is an exercise where MassDOT can request additional limitation above that obligation authority to program every July and August. So it's called August redistribution. And as such, we build in an anticipated $50 million requested August redistribution into our financial planning every year. This past fiscal year, 2023, we actually requested and received just shy of $80 million of August redistribution. The previous year, we received $151 million of August redistribution. It's a miserable process, just throwing that out there. So that's where we just hold it to that 50 and hope we can keep to that. The formula that determines the total funds available at the bottom is our base obligation authority plus $50 million of August redistribution minus something called GANs, or government anticipated notes. Have any of you ever heard of the Next Gen Bridge program or accelerated bridge programs? So about 10 years ago, MassDOT had advertised for construction several bridge projects using state bond cap to the tune of over $1 billion, if I'm remembering correctly. And the State House, A&F, Administration of Finance, set a schedule to repay those bonds with something called GANs, debt repayments. So it's kind of like a mortgage on the bridges, and they're paying themselves back with federal funding. It's nearly $100 million a year, according to that schedule. So we have to be mindful about that before we program anything else, and that's why we have GANs in the formula here. So our obligation authority plus our redistribution minus those GANs repayments equal our total funds available each year. This is a look at what our apportionment looks like for this current tip. It's about 837 million is what we planned for. It's actually 829 million. And then with an obligation limitation of 90%, we get to the $746 million of base obligation authority. When you factor in the $50 million of redistribution we build into our financial projections each year, it's roughly $800 million of federal core formula funding for federal fiscal year 2024 that's available. And according to the bipartisan infrastructure law, which runs from 2022 to 2026, this increases at a rate of about 2% annually. So for our 27 and 28 projections, since we don't have a crystal ball and don't know if they're going to do an extension of bill or come up with another catchy acronym, we will just assume a 2% annual rate of increase until directed otherwise by the feds. Southeast Mass has a regional target share of that funding that they also get matching funds for. Federal aid projects typically have an 80% federal, 20% local match. Massachusetts might be the only state, I think, where the state provides the match on most federal aid projects. This amounts to about $27 to $30 million a year for the Southeast Mass region. If you notice, the 25 and 26 amounts look a little lower. The reason for that is because 2025 and 2026 are the last year of those GANs repayments, and they're the biggest payments. So they're going to go, because those go up and those are subtracted from the top, it kind of just ultimately leaves you roughly level funded in 2025 and 2026. And then you see a big jump in funding availability in 27 and 28. Any questions? Okay. I just wanted to show a snapshot of what your project list looks like for federal fiscal year 2024 to get a general idea of what's on the federal aid program in Southeast Mass. So at the moment, we have some projects that have actually previously advertised, but the region's still paying for this year, like Fall River, the corridor improvements on Route 79 Duval Street. Big one that's set to advertise later this year and that we will need to perform a TIP amendment for because of a very large cost increase is this New Bedford superstructure replacement of I-195. That's going to be one of the largest projects in the state at $355 million. We have Marion Wareham Bridge replacement, US Route 6 over the, who wants to pronounce that for me? Wewiantic River, thank you. In Swansea, we have improvements on Route 6 at Gardner's Neck Road. Taunton has corridor improvements and related work on Broadway from Purchase Street to Jackson Street. SRTS stands for our Safe Routes to School program. In Fairhaven, Leroy Wood Elementary School has an SRTS project funded that's advertising for construction later this year. There's also Wareham corridor improvements on Route 6 at Swifts Beach Road. Another project in New Bedford for pavement preservation and related work on Route 140. Dartmouth to Wareham guide and traffic sign replacement on a section of I-195. Wareham to Raynham guide and traffic sign replacement on a section of I-495. And lastly, a bridge preservation project in Somerset. I'm not quite sure which route that's on, but those are the bridge numbers.
That's what's going out to bid.
Yes, that's what is either advertised or will be going out to bid this fiscal year. So before September 30th of 2024. How projects, program sizes are determined, a lot of things are taken into account. We look at what the priorities are for the regions, for the state. We have asset management plans. We have structurally deficient bridges that we're working to advance construction and investment on to make them no longer structurally deficient. We have a number of performance projection tools that colleagues throughout our agency use and MPO staffs use to determine what their own needs are. All of those things are taken into account with not only how the region prioritizes its regional target sizing, but also how the state sets a program target size for safety improvements, for safe routes to school, for its bicycle and pedestrian programs. In our STIP, we actually have a line for capacity, expansion capacity improvements, but we don't actually invest in capacity projects in Massachusetts, except for our bicycle and pedestrian networks, because it's not a state priority to widen highways. So all of those things are taken into consideration with how we size our programs every year. And as I noted earlier, MassDOT will be providing that latest guidance to MPO leadership at the MassDOT MARPA annual meeting in January for the 2025 to 2029 cycle. So I think February is going to be the really exciting MPO meeting to attend if you're not normally in attendance at those. All right, more on funding categories for projects. So the STIP includes detailed explanation of highway and transit funding categories, as well as assumptions for available funding in out years that we plan for. The STIP must not only be fiscally constrained across our program targets, but also by funding categories. This is that color of money that Jackie was talking about. So if Massachusetts receives $38.5 million of HSIP apportionment in 2024, that's Highway Safety Improvement Program funding, even if your heart's in the right place and you think, I only want the safest roads possible and every project should be a safety project, if we only have $38.5 million of HSIP funding available, we can't program $800 million of federal aid only to safety program projects. We only have $38.5 million available. This is something that before I started doing this work, I didn't understand. I used to be a bike advocate. I didn't understand how come we can't just have highways converted to bike lanes and bike trails and everything be dandy. It's because there's not the appropriate funding colors to make those types of projects happen. But the more you understand about the funding and how the funding is eligible to use, the more creative you can get with using different funding colors to make your project goals come to fruition. And this is the sweet spot I've been working to navigate. So I have detail about this in our big 500 plus page STIP document. And I include a link on how to navigate there, but I just have it here on the screen for you now. And I'm just going to do a quick high level summary about what the programs are that are in the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as where you can learn more from FHWA on them. There's the National Highway Freight Program. There is the National Highway Performance Program. NHPP is the largest funding source we receive, and it's what funds the maintenance of our bridges, of our interstate highways. There's also, unfortunately, in Massachusetts, because more than 10% of the surface area of our on-system bridges are structurally deficient, Massachusetts has an additional penalty of about $95 million of federal aid that needs to be programmed on improving the structural integrity of our bridges every year. Surface Transportation Block Grant. This program, STBG, is a favorite of the regional planning agencies to leverage for municipally initiated projects because it's the most versatile. You can use it on nearly anything. Unfortunately, it's fiscally constrained. We only have so much of it, and it is kind of a beauty contest around the state on who can go after it. So one of the things we encourage our municipalities, regional partners, and the designers for projects to look at is if you're trying to do a project that is really only STBG eligible on the surface, are there components of the project that might be eligible for other funding colors to be assigned? So sidewalks, for example, can be funded with our Transportation Alternatives Program, or TAP, which might be the next funding source. Well, there's TAP. So if we have a project that is a $3 million program line item in Wareham, for example, and Wareham's your region, right? I know it's an edge town with Cape. Okay, so if Wareham has a $3 million SVG project program this year, and the final design comes in and it's actually a $4 million project, it needs a TIP amendment. That project will not be able to advertise unless we find that $1 million of available funding to make it wholly funded. And unfortunately, we don't have any STBG left statewide at the moment to cover that cost increase. So we do an analysis on, well, is there TAP eligibility for it? Is there CMAQ eligibility? CMAQ is the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. CMAQ has a consultation process that has to happen, but ultimately what you need to know is if your project falls into a project category list that will improve air quality or reduce congestion, it is most likely CMAQ eligible. Maybe not fully CMAQ eligible the whole project, but certain components of that project might be CMAQ eligible. We might look at using CMAQ or TAP or another funding color to wholly fund your projects in a year. Some funding programs not only have funding made available by a state, but it's restricted to the urbanized areas that we call that non-flex, where certain amounts of those funds can only be spent in certain areas. So for your region, there's actually a big swath of the Southeast Mass region that's in both the Providence, Pawtucket urbanized area. So basically, if you're near the state line, and then also the Barnstable urbanized area bleeds into the Southeast Mass region as well. So you actually have two non-flex areas you can draw from. You might actually also have some Boston urbanized area as well. So, and then the 2020 census just changed things all over again. So Southeast Mass will probably be in touch with you for 2026 to 2030 TIP development with all new urbanized area considerations, because I believe New Bedford is now classified as its own urbanized area per the 2020 census. I mentioned HSIP, or Highway Safety Improvement Program. It's about $37 to $40 million a year of available apportionment. Hazard elimination funds for railway highway crossings. This is a small amount of money, but something I actually struggle to know is eligible in a project unless a designer tells me that, or if it's in the project description. So I know there's a lot of railroads across this region and much of the rest of the Commonwealth. If you have a transportation project that is improving a grade crossing or eliminating a grade crossing, there are actually bonuses from the bipartisan infrastructure law of more money the state can use to fund those types of projects. So that's just a good consideration. If you have any of those, make sure to communicate that with your staff. I talked about CMAQ. CMAQ is what we largely use to fund our bicycle and pedestrian program at the state level, as well as any regional target projects for bicycle and pedestrian improvement. If you're doing transit signal prioritization, if you're doing a bike share program, bike share capital costs are actually CMAQ eligible. Fun fact, they're also NHPP eligible. No one's used NHPP for that yet, but you can. They're wayfinding signage for your trail network. If you have some recently completed trails that you want to improve wayfinding for. Not only is that CMAQ eligible, it's 100% federal aid eligible. It doesn't even require a match. So there's all sorts of rules in this gigantic subset of our STIP where I explain them. And there's even more on FHWA's website explaining how these different funding categories from the bipartisan infrastructure law can be used. Check it out. Does anyone want to hear about transit funding, or should I just stop and take questions? I'm going to look at Jackie for that.
I think probably question.
Okay, let's go to questions. Thank you, guys. There's coffee in the back if you're not quite awake yet.
Are there certain like benchmarks that need to be met in the design process in order to be considered to be on the tip?
Yes. So as a baseline, we do not recommend programming any highway projects for tip programming until at minimum it's PRC approved and has a 6-digit project ID, a project designer on board. There are some steps to get to that point with that handholding I was talking about with the district and your region, that you need to make sure a project's at that point. But generally, if a project's only at an approved project status, it's not likely to get funded in the first 4 years of a tip, maybe year 4. But realistically, it would be pushed furthest out because it's going to take a long time to develop that project, get it to 25% design and beyond, and hit all of the requirements, especially right of way and environmental, which I'm not going to steal the thunder of. They'll talk more about how those processes work. Yes.
During that process.
Yep.
Who contacts the municipality to say that they want input from the municipality at like 25% or 50 or 75?
I'm going to actually defer to the district on that. So I don't know if Richard or Barbara are able to chime in, or anyone else from MassDOT.
Who's initiating the project?
If it's a let's say it's a municipally initiated project.
Then they're the ones that are dealing with the designer, and they'll be notified. They have to deal with the designer, but if it's a MassDOT initiated project, then MassDOT will reach out to them for the pre-25, setting up the 25% design public hearing. So it depends who initiated it, like Rich said.
Right. I mean, typically with that, there'd be a PIM, which is a public informational meeting. Where we typically at like a pre-25 or so, there's detours, other things. We meet with town officials, usually public safety,
How soon?
DPW, go over.
How soon after the
Initiation of it.
yes?
It's not really based off the initiation, it'd be based off early plan development. There's something that we can share.
Well, originally, like if we are doing a project with a MassDOT doing a project within, obviously a community. Once it goes through PSC, we send out a letter to the community notifying the community, the municipality that we're, going to be coming through with a project. Even if the municipality initiates a project, they still get a letter that's a little bit longer letter that has like this laundry list of items that they need to follow to get the project moving, and it gives you like an outline of what the city or town needs to do to get the project going.
I can cover a little bit of that.
Because we're just beyond the safety audit.
Mr. Kelly over here is going to push it. He's talking about the South Main Street project.
Thank you.
Okay.
So he's specifically asking for his project.
Oh, okay.
They've just passed the road safety audit stage. What should he expect next?
And we're somewhat new to the whole thing as far as being working in a
I think we've had a meeting with project managers already. sure if it was a 25 meeting we had, I think, with the town on that project already. But yeah, that is assigned to project manager, so, I mean, you can always reach out to the project manager to assign to the project also.
So
So I guess the question too is like, at what point do we start advocating be included on the tip? We don't want to do it too soon, right?
The whole process.
It's the whole process.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we gotta start.
Start now.
No, that's an excellent question. If
Yeah.
it wasn't heard on the call, when is it appropriate for someone from a municipality to advocate for their project to be TIP programmed? As long as your project's initiated and as long as there is funding availability and a readiness year.
I think we want to see the twos. I would say almost every project initiated starts with 20, 50 days. It's not on the tip.
Correct. Yeah.
Being developed, and then as it develops and you have more of a schedule on when it would be ready, that's when you start advocating to actually put it on the tip. So then you have a tentative advertisement.
Right. It's just critical that you're having those conversations with District 5 and with SRPEDD to make sure that when we're soliciting new projects for TIP programming consideration, if you've had design advancement on them and they don't show up on a new project list when we have our TIP readiness exercise, you're not going to get the input from the right-of-way team, from environmental, from the highway chief administrator and chief engineer, or Office of Transportation Planning, to get that wholesome consensus that yes, we agree this is ready to advance in the next 5 years or not. So it's critical that as any progress happens on your initiated projects, that you make sure to continue having that dialogue. It is a coordinated or a comprehensive, cooperative, and continuing process, going back to those 3 C's. I know that sounds like sweet and cute, but it is those things.
Let me just add, Derek, that to get a project in that 5-year timeline, we do like to have a design schedule. So once we see the design schedule, that's when we go and do our evaluation criteria and we look for where that project would fit.
I saw Pam wanted to add something real fast before we go to questions.
I can't ask this right away. One thing I was gonna add is, if it's your project, municipality project, many times you've hired a designer, but you really need to be the champion of your project the entire time. Your consultant's managing dozens of projects, and they have dozens, they have, they have dozens of clients, but you need to make sure that you're managing your project at all times. You're gonna hear me speak to that today when I give the right-of-way presentation. But you need to keep an eye on your design schedule, your deliverables. You need to work with the district. You need to work with the MPO and the funding. Just because you hire a consultant doesn't mean you can just walk away. And I say that because I've been doing this for over 20 years. And you see the community, they do their best. They try to do a really good job scoping the project, moving it through the process. And if they're not championing it and they're not staying on it, we don't have a strong municipal liaison who's speaking on behalf of championing the project, it tends to slow down and tends to fall behind. So just something to
Sure, no, that's great. Well, if there's anybody in the room here that's gonna be deciding on the Acushnet project, we're advocating for it.
I worked on your road with your bridge project, and you guys did a great job.
Oh, great, thank you.
I also
Yep.
highly recommend you come to our JTPG meeting where we talk about where we are in the TIP process, what projects are ready, and where we talk about how we evaluate them.
Yes.
One quick question. I'm Dana. I work for Congressman Jake Auchincloss, so we are yet another layer of this. And SRPEDD has been amazing. Jackie and Lisa have been answering all of our questions about how this process works, because now we're in the world of like these congressionally directed funding projects for these itty bitty projects that don't necessarily have the municipal sort of horsepower behind them. My quick question is there another PRC after today before the big February meeting?
I don't believe so.
No.
Okay, so if something doesn't make it through today, they kind of like,
Even if something does make it through PRC today, I think the slate of PRC projects being initiated today or this month are unlikely to be ready for showtime for TIP programming.
Okay.
Projects going through PRC are embryos. They're not even
Okay.
infants.
Okay.
So like, if we're trying to get to graduation
Yeah.
day, like we're gonna wait till adolescence before we program that
Fair,
project.
this is really helpful, and we can offline about it, but these congressionally directed spending projects seem to have a little bit of like an expiration, I think, so thank you, I appreciate this, this is
Yep.
great, thank you.
And depending on what they're trying to do, this might not be the best process for it. There's other methods where, let's say, the state roadway and considering their permit. There's other methods,
Yeah, and yeah,
depending on.
Federal
Depending on how much
regulations,
the funding is and what
Yeah.
the regulations are,
thank
you
you,
know, where it can be put in and addressed.
thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes.
So what happens when 100% design is submitted to you? What steps follow that?
If something's at 100% design and not tip programmed, I think you can make a strong case for inclusion on it. Okay, then you're on schedule. If you're stuck at 100% and not getting past something, maybe because your town has to have a town meeting vote, maybe because there's a utility or right-of-way access concern.
My question is, do you have to do anything else? Because,
That's probably a good
any
question.
more reviews or any more?
Yes.
Yes,
There could be.
it depends on the project.
It depends on, so your project could be at 100%, but it, you know, maybe not all of the comments from the previous review were addressed with 100%. And maybe there's, you know, additional information that's needed after the 100%. We have 100% ES&E, and stuff and estimates that come in. So there is another submission after the 100%. And again, it depends on the design reviews from all of the different MassDOT sections, and also any outside regulatory agencies that may need to weigh in and that may have conflicts. We have a lot of federal permits, state permits that are needed, and sometimes the outcome of those permits may make minor design changes to your project, which will require a new submission.
Sort of timeline we talking?
Norm, are you looking for the finish line? Do you want to know when you can?
I'm just trying to get an idea.
What's your project?
There's a bike path in Marion, just 100% submitted.
It's programmed in
Program.
25 with statewide. It's been
Okay.
pushed back, it's been pushed forward.
And moving target, that's what it's right. And part of it's our, from part of it's
Part of it is
now.
the right of way. I do know.
Yes, I understand that
Yeah.
part of it.
Part of it's the right of way.
Yeah,
But I just want to make sure there's nothing else besides that that's standing in our way.
usually it is just right. If it's at 100%.
Environmental, but I'm not positive on the environmental permitting as well. But I think it's usually environmental and right away, and just kind of getting through that process and then buttoning up any other small items. And then, but we're actively working on it, and we know it's a project in the pipeline, and we do want to help get it out.
Last question, and then we're gonna go to Jackie's
All right,
presentation.
I don't know if this is good now or when you deal with the color of money,
Well, discuss the color money, so go ahead.
but can you combine all these fundings with like CDBG funding?
I believe yes. So I don't see something if it's not STIP funding sources. I'll see design earmarks like from the representative's office, or sometimes our Senate partners also, our senators also get funding earmarks that we can assign to projects that might have multiple BIL sources on them. We have a project in Hopkinton, Westboro for I-495 and I-90 interchange that was a $400 million project, and I think had 7 different funding colors on it. So it is possible to combine funding sources and also use a combination of non-federal sources for a project. In that I-90 interchange project example, for example, we used MHS funds, so toll collection funds, to fund part of that project. So
If you're connected to the town projects, there's something special they want, they can do non-participating funding. The town kicks in money, and you're getting funding from other sources in the state. Let's say you're doing a sewer upgrade. We wouldn't pay for that, but you can leverage the project, do it during it, so you don't have to rebuild the road and the pavement. And you can get that you're funding from the revolving fund, or there's other, that would pass through the town. But as we saw it, it'd be non-participating money coming from the municipality.
Yeah, I live in the city of Everett, which is Boston MPO, but they had a Ferry Street reconstruction project program for 2 years with federal funds. But there were design elements that were not federally eligible, and they used gaming commission funding because they had the casino in town.
Yeah,
So
you get the casino.
Yeah. So like you can combine non-traditional sources to get a project through.
Is it not on the project we're doing now, but is it better to do a partnership and do a regional 2 or 3 communities than individual?
Depends on the community.
It depends on the projects you're trying to do
Yeah.
too.
It would be, if there's more than one community involved, they become larger projects. The problem with larger projects, which we're facing right now in the TIP, is that if they get behind schedule, we have nothing ready to program. So right now we have a surplus of $14 million in federal fiscal year 24 because a large project wasn't ready. So we prefer at the NPO level, smaller projects. And smaller projects we're finding now are like $4 or $5 million. And we program at least one bigger project every year, anywhere from like 10 to 14 million. So if you can keep it around, half of our target, ideally that's what we, would be ideal to program.
Yeah, and we do see projects in other parts of the Commonwealth that are still like $1 to $2 million and not like $5 million. It's really going to vary depending on the project. Sometimes it does make sense to do a project regionally for multiple towns, especially if it's a corridor improvement. Maybe it doesn't make sense to do something phased, or rather just the whole shebang, unfortunately. Yeah, Pam.
I was just gonna say from a right-of-way perspective, as you add additional towns, it's more complicated because you don't want one town to advance too fast. And your partnering town not to be, maybe they're struggling and running behind. And then the problem is you spent money on appraisals that become stale dated. And you may have even recorded your easement, you may have to go back and reacquire property. So, 2 towns on the municipal level, if you have 2 very cooperative towns, good designer, strong designer, and you can move together and really stay on the same right-of-way acquisition timeline, same permitting, you have 2 different conservation commissions working on it. It is viable. Once you get to 3, you're really gonna add risk to your project.
I think an example of that locally is the bike path in Norton and Mansfield. But on that project, only a small piece was in Mansfield. But they had the same designer, they had the same goal, they worked towards it together. But that's kind of the best case example.
I'm familiar with that one. In my front yard.
I'm going to sit down and pass the mic to Jackie for her slides now, but thank you all. And please reach out to myself or Ray Sequame from Office of Transportation Planning if you have any other STIP, funding color, or other concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Derek. Great. So I'm going to go a little bit more on the project development side of the TIP process. So I'm just going to do like a kind of like a high level. These are all the steps. Anything right of way or environmental permitting or public engagement, you're going to hear more about that. So I'm going to kind of skip over those things, but I'm going to show you where they occur in the process. This will be a little bit of overlap between Derek's presentation and mine, but hopefully it will help to reinforce what the TIP is. And the goal of my presentation is to let you know what goes into a good TIP project and what will help your project compete best for funding with other sources. And before I get into it, I just want to say, and I don't mean this to be discouraging, but the TIP is a long haul process. It's a great opportunity to get your larger projects funded or even your smaller projects funded with a good amount of money. But that doesn't mean that there isn't commitment needed on the local, and it doesn't mean that your community won't expend any funds to get this project across the finish line. And most TIP projects take between 5 and 10 years. I can remember when I was introduced to the TIP project, I heard the TIP process, I heard that, and I was so discouraged. But someone once told me that time will pass, and by the time you're done, you will have an excellent project. And the time's going to pass anyway, so why not be working towards a goal of having an excellent project and helping your community advance something that can improve safety or connectivity, or it really is a very valuable process. It's just, you should know getting into it, it is a long, comprehensive, as Derek said, process. So you should be prepared for it, and you should be prepared to have commitment on the community level. You're not just going to apply for this funding, get this funding, and not have to do anything after that. There is a lot of steps that the community needs to take. I'm sure Pam will go over that a lot more detailed than I will. But you should know that going into the process. So just back up a little bit. The TIP is a 5-year rolling capital investment plan. Derek did an excellent job of explaining this. But I want to talk a little bit about the bodies, the people that program the TIP. So we have 2 groups at that we work with at SRPEDD that are responsible for picking the projects and putting the projects in the list that get them funded. And those are the JTBG and the MPO. The JTBG is the Joint Transportation Planning Group. Many of you in this room have probably been to a JTBG meeting. It's the advisory public-facing group that advises the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Ours is specifically the Southeastern Massachusetts Metropolitan Planning Organization. The JTPG advises, provides guidance. They kind of set the priorities and the tone for what type of projects go into the TIP. The MPO is the actual body that makes that vote, that puts it on the TIP. So ideally, you want your community to have representation at both, because you want SRPEDD, the MPO, you want everybody to know why your project is important to the region and why it should be funded. And then you also want somebody there that can help make the vote. The MPO is a much more structured body than a JTPG. The JTPG has representation from every community on it. People from the public can come and speak at the JTPG. There's a lot more community. We provide a lot of information about funding and the process and things like that at the JTPG level. The MPO people are appointed to that board. There's representation from each of the 4 mayors. We have at-large commissioners that represent different groups. And then we also have, how many seats, Lisa? I'm 4 seats from communities. So it's a little bit harder to get on there, but you want to make sure that you are represented in both groups. So again, those priorities that I'm talking about, for us at SRPEDD and what we've heard from our communities is that safety is the highest priority. And when I'm talking priorities, I'm talking about where you want to see your dollars spent. So our communities, the public, SRPEDD, and I should say SRPEDD is technically the staff to the SMMPO. That's why we're part of this process, federally mandated process. But so we try to program our projects with safety in mind, but we also have other priorities that have been identified. The region wants to see more drainage is one that we get that actually gets a lot of weight in our process. More connectivity for bicycles and pedestrians. We also program transit projects. That's kind of a separate process, so I won't really get into that today. And just more things that benefit communities. So those priorities are formalized in our regional transportation planning document. It's also used for our evaluation criteria process, which I will talk about a little bit more later on, but that's how we rank projects. So those priorities that the JTPG and the MPO set, they are used in the selection process for picking projects. That being said, the JTPG and the MPO have a lot of weight in that process. So even though we've set these priorities and we've evaluated these projects and they are given scores, and those scores are used to recommend which projects go into the process. The JTBG and the MPO actually have a lot of say in what gets programmed, so it's very important to have representation there. So what types of projects the TIP can fund? Derek went over this very well with, especially in the color funding discussion, but I wanted to focus a little bit on the smaller projects. So typically we see, as Lisa said, larger corridor projects, intersection improvements, larger type complete street boulevardization projects, bicycle and pedestrian, we see a decent amount of shared use paths. But we'd really like to see a lot more smaller projects come through. We understand that the TIP is the mechanism that communities use for funding those larger projects that they can't otherwise find funding for, but we also want to provide an opportunity. Some ideas for smaller projects are like smaller bicycle and pedestrian, like closing the gap in your bicycle network. If you have a project that's short, less than half a mile or something like that, that's still eligible. It's still an expense. You can still go for that. Systemic improvements, curb ramps, crosswalks, things like that. If you have a project throughout your town that would improve a certain type of thing, that's eligible too. Wayfinding, as Derek mentioned, bike racks, bike share. There's also something called demonstration projects. We haven't funded any of that yet. Other regions have, but if you have an area that you think would benefit from traffic calming, but you are not sure how your community would respond to it, you could, if you wanted to narrow the road or put a bike lane in or something like that, you could do a smaller demonstration type project where you put in bollards or paint or things like that, to show the community what those improvements would do and how that road would feel without investing in a full project. That's something that's eligible too. There are other sources of funding for doing these smaller projects, but we also want you to think of the TIP when you're thinking of this stuff too. So each level of participation in the TIP process has responsibilities. The main players are the community and MassDOT, and also SRPEDD and the SMMPO on the funding side. It's important to note that when you are doing a TIP project, as I said earlier, it's not just you get the funding and the project happens. You are responsible for funding the design and engineering. You're responsible for most right-of-way costs. You're responsible for permitting. And these are for locally initiated projects on local roads. This is not for projects on roads under MassDOT jurisdiction. And you're also responsible for engaging your community in the process. Andrea is going to talk about that as well, but you really want that community engagement in your process early on. You don't want to just try to improve a road and then have people come out with pitchforks and kill your project mid-process after you've spent money and time and energy on it. So I really encourage the community engagement in that part. And also, as Pam mentioned, you really want to have a champion for your project. I've seen a number of projects fail because there's been turnover in the town, or somebody who is really involved in a project kind of just disappears, and then nobody is leading that project. Nobody is pushing the designer. So you do want to have a community champion, but you kind of want it to be more like a team. There should be one person who's like really driving the process, but you want to make sure you also have support from other people, and that if something were to happen, somebody else would push your project. Community turnover has killed several projects that would have been excellent projects had they had someone directly championing for them. So I'm sure Pam will talk about that more, but I can't emphasize that enough. Like, you really need that community support, and you really need somebody pushing that project at the community level. MassDOT, this was covered a little bit earlier in that process too, but works with the community and the designer engineer to kind of move the process along. Really, the community, if it's your project, you need to be on top of your designer, but the MassDOT will also provide them with deadlines and things that they need to meet. They run the design and review process. They will host the design public hearing, which is a very formal hearing held at 25% design, where the community comes and has an opportunity to comment on the project. It's a very formal process. You ideally want to have different ways of engaging your community well before that point and also around it. And they allocate statewide funding. And then SRPEDD, staff to the MPO, we work with communities very early on to help you identify projects. We can also help you initiate projects if you are struggling with that process. We evaluate projects using criteria, which I'll talk about in more detail. And then we allocate the regional target funding so that 27, 26 million that Derek was talking about earlier. So I probably should have titled this, what goes into a good TIP project? So what problem are you trying to fix? So when you go to initiate a project, that's the very first question they are going to ask you on the process. Maybe your name, but after that, it's going to be, what problem or need are you trying to solve? But you also want to have, when you do that first step, you want to have a good idea of what are the impacts of the project? Are there people that are going to be affected by this project? Have you talked to them?
Sorry.
Ooh.
No.
Oh no.
Cancel.
I do not want to go to PRC. I'm sorry. Are there equity considerations? Does this project benefit certain populations, or would it be a burden to them? Will there be any need for right-of-way or takings? That is a very strict process that I will not talk about. Pam's going to talk about that, but you should have an idea of whether your project is going to have some impact. Is it a corridor project? Are you going to be widening the road? You really need to consider that very early on. Have you considered all users in this project, or is this project just to benefit cars? The transportation is the movement of goods and people. It's not just cars. So you always need to consider everyone who might be using that road and the different ways that they might be using that road. There's a healthy transportation policy directive at MassDOT. All projects must consider all users. So you really need to have that in mind very early on. Do you have drainage or stormwater needs that can balloon quite quickly? You want to have a good handle on what's out there and what you might need to upgrade. And what are the current conditions? Is your pavement good? Is your do you have sidewalks there now? Or do they need to be upgraded? Are there bicycle connections that you'd like to make? You really want to have like a holistic approach to your project, not just a I want to go and pave this road. You need to look at it from the whole perspective. And Derek had a much better graphic for this, which I think I'm going to steal from him after this meeting. But so this is a simplified version of what Derek went through earlier. And this is on the your left is the MassDOT design process, and on the right is our programming process. So this is what happens at the MPO level, and the MassDOT design process is what the communities and MassDOT go through to get a project on the tip. So your very first step, even before you initiate a project, have a conversation with the district. I wish Barbara and Rich were still here. Have a conversation with the district. They will help you initiate. They will let you know what the steps are. They will let you know if they think that your project is viable for funding or not from the very beginning. So, and I can't emphasize the importance of doing that right from the beginning. And then after you have that conversation, and you can talk to us too. If you don't want to go directly to MassDOT, you can always come talk to Lisa and I at SRPEDD. We'll talk to you. We've been through the TIP process many times. We have a good idea of what gets funded and what doesn't. And we can help you initiate that conversation with MassDOT too, if you need it. And then after that, the Massachusetts project intake tool is MassDOT's tool for initiating a project. It's an application process online. It has a lot of GIS layers associated with it. So when you go through that process, it will ask you a bunch of questions. You answer the questions. It also provides the district with information on if there are environmentally sensitive areas, and the community as well, there's a bunch of different layers that they use with geographic information on it. So you can see what the district is considering in their decision-making process. You get a good idea from that from the questions and also what the layers are. And then you can also know, sometimes there's things on there that you might not be aware of that they have mapped. So the first step is a project need. You answer some questions about what the project's gonna do. Again, that's where having that holistic idea of what you're gonna do with your project is helpful, because they're gonna ask you all kinds of stuff about it. And then once that project need form goes through, the district will send you notification of it. They will send you a follow-up letter on what your next steps need to be. They probably will want to meet with you to talk about your project further, especially if you haven't taken that first step. And then they'll let you know what needs to go into the project scope step, or the project initiation step, which is next. I think I go a little bit more into this on the next slide. And then it goes, after you go through the project initiation, it goes to project review committee, and then design and engineering. And Jack already talked about this, so I'm repeating. And then ideally, the end goal, construction. But while this design process is going on, there's a side process of your project is going to go through the JTPG and the MPO. Once you hit that project review committee and you get the, hopefully, go ahead and that project number, it comes to us, we put it on a list, and then we start taking the steps to evaluate it. Our evaluation criteria, which I have more detail on, helps us rank them. It gets ranked, it goes to the GTPG and the MPO, and hopefully gets programmed.
Hey, Jackie.
I just realized I'm very repetitive with yours.
No, you're good. I just want to add one little thing on that conversation with the district note, since the question had come up about regional projects and projects that might involve more than one municipality. Make sure you're having a conversation with your neighbors if you're looking to do a regionally significant project, or a project that might exceed the boundaries of your municipality. We've seen some projects get far enough along in design, and all of a sudden the big roadblock is there is not agreement with their neighbors or people that hadn't signed on. We've talked about, sometimes there's staff changes and disagreements of opinions, but the earlier on you cooperate and communicate with each other, the easier this process is to grow.
And I should have said at the beginning of mine, this is a conversation. If you have a question while I'm talking, please ask it. I don't want to get all the way to the end and then have you forget your question. So stop me at any point. I'm sure my boss will if I say something wrong. And again, this is a little bit more detail on that process. These will go out with links later. But a note about PRC, they only meet like 3 or 4 times a year, and their dates are always published online. But if you're submitting, you don't want to try to get like, if they have December 14th date, you don't want to try to be spinning your project on December 14th. You want to be like a month and a half. You want to be way before that. But if you can, you probably want to be like a month and a half or 2 months out, because it goes through a very long internal process too. Once you submit that project's, well, technically PRC doesn't even come after the second process. So if you're targeting a specific date, just keep in mind that you need to be well before that date. So after PRC approval, MassDOT, they said earlier, they'll send you a very detailed letter about what the next steps will need to be. You will need to select a designer or engineer. They have an approved list. I highly recommend that you use the approved list. The MassDOT process is long and comprehensive, and you want somebody who has experience with that process. I've seen a number of times where people have picked designers with less experience in the process, and their project gets delayed because they're not familiar with what MassDOT wants, and then they have to go back to the drawing board, or you get a lot of comments and you have to go through it will take you longer if you pick a engineer or a designer who's not familiar with the process. I believe you have to pick one that's on their approved list, but there's ones on there that have more experience and one that have less, so you want to consider that. The designer and engineer will walk you through the whole design process, but again, you also have to be on top of them because they have several projects. Derek already went through the milestones, and then more information on this process, there's a link there that will be provided after the meeting. Evaluation criteria, talked a little bit. This is how we review and bank projects. I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of what we look at for evaluation criteria. So when you're developing your project, you have an idea of how it will score and relate to other projects. So as I said earlier, safety is always our highest priority. And I apologize, I'm not sure what happened to that text there. But safety has the largest amount of points in our process. But there's other things that will get you points too. Bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and transit. If you're doing a project along a transit route, you should definitely consider ways of improving transit connections. Mobility and congestion. And I have these. Oops,
Sorry.
that's okay. Reading all Derek's Teams messages. So, and then community impact and support. I will say we've redone these many times. The region's priorities will shift. We will get better information. We've evolved this process over time. We are about to embark on a big overall haul of it. We also worked with the GeoDot office at MassDOT to develop a tool that helps us do this online, that gives us access to all that geographic information I was talking about earlier. So we're excited about that. It's going to streamline the process, but these questions some iteration of these will probably still be there, and all of the things in here will still be a consideration. So I'm just going to go through them really quick and highlight a couple things that you probably want to consider including in your project so that it ranks better. And again, drainage and stormwater will get you a decent amount of points in here too. Has the project been identified as a need in the regional transportation plan, or is it part of a planning or engineering study? So technically, to be funded, the project needs to be identified in our regional transportation plan, which is a large document. We just redid it this past year. We went to every community. We asked everybody what their priorities were. We also do our best to keep it so it doesn't, so we keep our options open in the tip so it can fund a wide variety of projects, even if that specific road hasn't been identified. Generally, it can be, but if you have a specific project that you're advocating for, I highly recommend being part of that process and letting us know why that project is important to you. A lot of times our projects will come out of our top 100 most dangerous locations, because safety is a priority, or something other in there, but it does need to be identified in the RTP to be eligible for TIP funding. It's part of the federal process. We're probably going to strengthen these questions, and Andrea is going to talk about them a little bit more, but we do look at if you've done any public engagement, and especially if you've done that early on, and if you've considered providing translation services, and if the project benefits or burdens an environmental justice or Title VI community. Maintenance and infrastructure, we look at, does it improve pavement? Does it improve an identified pavement problem? Are you upgrading older traffic control devices that will get you points? And again, stormwater and drainage. Lots of stuff we look at with safety, including if it improves bicycle and pedestrian safety. Is it an identified problem that you're fixing? Have you done a road safety audit? That kind of stuff. We also look at emergency evacuation routes or freight routes. Emergency evacuation routes is a short plug. We are doing a study on that to try to get a better handle on what the community has for evacuation routes and what improvements are needed. And mobility and congestion. Do you have bottlenecks? Are you improving multimodal connection? Are you improving freight mobility? Livability, sustainable development is more, is this a quality of life improvement for your community? And also, is it providing economic development opportunities? And then we do look at environmental impacts of the project. These are a little bit harder for us to ascertain, so the more information that you can provide us on what your project is doing or impacting is very helpful. And then Derek also went over this, but this is the region-specific timeline for the TIP. This is how we develop our regional list every year. this time of year, we're looking for information. December and February, we start to take that information and turn it into a list for funding. It's a good time to interact with the JTPG and the MPO to find out what potential projects are on there and to advocate for your project. March is when the lists are selected, and then April is when they go out to the public, and then May is when it's finalized. And we do this every year, but you really want to keep an eye on what's going on with this process. I put together this resource slide. This is more for when I mail these out after. You can click on all these things, but we put some sign guides. I also wanted to highlight the Massachusetts Municipal Resource Guide for Walkability, and they also have one for bikeability. These have a lot of resources for communities. If you are looking to improve bicycle and pedestrian facilities, there's a lot of guidance in these that can be really helpful. And then, anybody have any questions on any of that? Dan?
Good morning. Since we have some MassDOT, I know we discussed this question a few times, but we're trying to start. Is there any eligibility options for a non-jurisdictional state highway to be considered the state initiated project? More specifically, the Route 6 that runs through Fall River, Eastern Avenue, jurisdictional state highway that needs dramatic help for all of the items being discussed. So it's a project that we can hold off for a while trying to complete. We're trying to figure out would it potentially be a state initiated project. That was the first district court. I haven't been able to get a right answer, so but we'll be trying to initiate it ourselves as well. And we're so thankful for the Route 79 project and how well that went, because there are small portions of that project that are non-jurisdictional map. So I'm thinking the answer may be yes, but before we go crazy investing time, effort, I'd like to have that discussion with someone along the way to see if we can potentially move that as a state issue.
Yeah, I think on that front, to the first slide, I had that conversation if you had one.
Great, thank you.
Try and set something up for you.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else?
Regardless of the jurisdiction, I'm sure the project improvements where you're describing sound like it's something that's federally eligible. I just don't know.
Yeah, well, I know Jack and Lisa both asked me to improve the streets, which we're trying to find a way to do it, but it's a major project.
All right. So I'm Andrea. I'm the Transportation Outreach Coordinator at SRPEDD, and I'm just going to be talking a little bit about public engagement requirements and best practices for TIP projects.
A little bit louder.
So every successful project is the result of effective collaboration between various stakeholders, which begins with public outreach, good public outreach. So it's important to allow residents who are directly or indirectly impacted by a project an opportunity to be heard and involved in the decision-making process, especially people who wouldn't typically know about the project until much later on. A well-informed community increases the chances for acceptance of the project and improves the likelihood that it will be successful, will get funded, will get constructed. Feedback from project abutters, local residents, businesses should be actively pursued to build support and consensus for the project and address concerns and identify any potential opposition, which could be an issue later on. Some really important implications of community engagement and support that we had already mentioned. Community opposition can jeopardize or terminate the project. This is really, really important. And as we've seen happen in the past. So this is why public engagement, informing the community and gauging their support and concerns throughout the whole process, all the stages, is really important. Another implication, community impact and support, as we mentioned, is one of the evaluation criteria that's used to score projects for TIP programming consideration. So right now it accounts for 14 out of 100 points that you can get on your project. So projects receive additional points for going beyond the minimum and doing additional community outreach and engagement, especially targeted outreach to project abutters and any vulnerable populations near the project area. And then similarly, projects can lose valuable points for a lack of outreach and engagement efforts, especially if the project, again, is near vulnerable populations. So as Jackie mentioned, this summer will be revising our evaluation criteria. So this is likely, very likely to change, but for the 25 to 29 TIP, this is the criteria we'll be using. So kind of corresponding with parts 3 and 4 of this rubric, proponents are required to explain the impacts of projects on environmental justice and Title VI communities and engage these communities accordingly. You know, the SRPEDD region doesn't have as many of these populations as some other regions in the state, but this is a very important consideration still to think about in your project. This is in alignment with the MPO's goals and federal Title VI law to ensure that all people similarly benefit from projects and aren't disproportionately burdened, you know, on the basis of race, color, national origin, age, income, ability. So neighborhoods with environmental justice populations, I don't know how you get this to disappear. Sorry about that. So neighborhoods with environmental justice populations have historically experienced poorer health, safety, and environmental outcomes, as we know. For example, more instances of severe flooding, more pedestrian deaths, poor air quality. So the goal should be to minimize harmful effects of projects on environmental justice in Title VI communities and ensure that they similarly benefit from projects and investments. So SRPEDD identifies an environmental justice area as a census tract that exceeds SRPEDD's regional average of minority, so Black, Indigenous, people of color populations, and low-income populations. And then a Title VI area we identify as a census tract that exceeds SRPEDD's regional average of limited English proficient, older adult, and people with disability and racial minority populations. So if the project is located in or near an EJ area, you need to identify elements that are designed to improve safety, sustainability, and mobility for the EJ community, and improvements that distribute benefits and burdens fairly among the local populations. And you're expected to involve this EJ community in the process to help identify problems, needs, and opportunities for improvements that are going to impact these communities. So some ways that communities could be negatively impacted by projects include if you're going to reroute traffic through a neighborhood and worsen air quality and noise there, especially if it's a neighborhood where those are already issues, cutting off access to local businesses and community facilities, and increasing the ability to speed on a road. Hopefully that's not happening, but things to consider. So consistent dialogue with these communities is important for identifying issues and developing solutions that mitigate these impacts. And then the same applies for the Title VI communities if the project is located in or near Title VI area. So at this link, I wasn't able to open it right now, but we have a tool that we created internally at SRPEDD where you can, basically we have a map for each of these Title VI and EJ communities so you can just type in the address of your project or the roadway, and it'll show you if it'll show you which of these communities are near the project. And then if it's shaded in, it means that it's above SRPEDD's regional average. If that's the case, we recommend doing more targeted outreach to make sure you involve those communities in when you're doing community meetings and your outreach process and all that. And then the timeline. Public engagement, which involves, keeping all the stakeholders informed on project updates and addressing feedback and concerns, should begin at the very start of the process, like we mentioned, with identification of a problem, and it should continue through the study, design, and implementation of a solution, so beginning to end, and it should be initiated as early on as possible. So it begins with notifying the community of a potential project, especially people who have an interest in it or could be affected by it. So this includes residents, business owners, neighborhood groups, elected and appointed officials, public agencies, users of the roadway, and the general public in the project area. And it begins with gauging whether or not there's initial support for this project across these many stakeholder groups. So MassDOT does the 25% safety and engineering review, and then the design firm has to address the comments from the review before you can move on to the design public hearing stage. And then they host the design public hearing. And at this point, it's important for the city and town staff to continue outreach and update different stakeholder groups throughout the design process to maintain support for the project as the design evolves. And then after the design public hearing, the MPO staff considers the project status at 25%. And it then proceeds to the 75% design phase. And again, you should continue outreach and speaking with the community through the later design phases as well, to gain additional feedback on design and just in keeping people informed. And this is especially important because a major inhibitor to implementation of a project is with land takings. So the right-of-way negotiations, we're going to talk about later, but they can't start until later in the process, until design is complete. But if it's determined that land takings might be necessary early on, you should mention this as a broader possibility to the community as part of the initial public outreach. Just stating that some types of projects require land takings and it might be possible. But this is a topic, so you can imagine, that requires careful framing because you don't want to encourage opposition to the project early on, of course. And then in some cases, the land takings are going to happen on property that's already on the right of way. But if there is widespread opposition to a project for any reason, land takings or otherwise, it's always best to identify and address it as early on as possible. So you have plenty of time to develop solutions to these concerns, because community opposition at any point in the process, like earlier on or after you've spent so much time and effort on the project, like Jackie was talking about, it can jeopardize the project from moving forward at all. And then some outreach and engagement activities. So the formal public hearings are required by federal highway for federal aid projects, and MassDOT hosts the design public hearings for each project and advertises them, but it's important for you all, for communities, to make sure you share them out and advertise them as well, because folks are going to be more, of course, more in tune to their local communication channels. And this is like kind of going beyond, the minimum in your outreach and engagement efforts, and really trying to involve folks and build consensus and support for the project. So some examples of locations to post public meeting information and project updates include, social media posts, announcements on your city or town website, reaching out to community partners and organizations, asking them to share it out on their channels, doing flyer drops in the libraries, town halls, civic buildings, bus terminals, local businesses, YMCAs, doing press releases in the newspaper, mailings to the abutters of the project, the digital roadway signs that we see are also another good one. And then also, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to stop me at any point. No, I'm throwing a lot out there. In terms of logistics for meetings that you all coordinate, it's best practice, of course, to choose a date and time that's convenient for target populations and after work hours, and to choose a site that's on or near public transit and during transit service hours to give equal access to people who don't have a car to make it to the meetings. So GATRA and SRPEDD run until 6 p.m. on weekdays. Just keeping that in mind. And if possible, choose a site that's near the proposed project and is ADA accessible. Include maybe an in-person and virtual participation options to accommodate different schedules and different comfort with using a computer. Recording meetings is good, and publishing them on the city and town website for folks to see, or on the local cable channel. And then this one, which is also really important, please invite us, SRPEDD staff, to your community meetings that you do, so that we can stay in the loop and kind of stay informed and help you along the way. And then at these meetings, it's important to present the context of the project, if there was a study done, any initial findings that came out of it, and if it's included as a priority already and has that regional significance on our regional transportation plan. And then, yes.
Yeah, I have a question about public meetings, just because unfortunately, other than MPO meetings, I rarely get to attend them. How well attended are they in general when hosted in person? Or is that a challenge?
Are you talking about like our JTPG or just
The tip you mean for projects?
Yeah, for projects, design public hearings,
It all depends,
community
Jared.
meetings.
Yeah, it all depends on the project. Like I would say like Route 79, very well attended, right? If you have a small intersection one, that can also be very well attended if someone wants to, pick it apart basically. And those are the attendees that, go to those design public hearings. But it varies. You may have 10, you may have 50.
So, yeah.
I wonder if any of our communities want to weigh in on that. You have good public attendance at your.
I would suggest that the majority of the projects that would reach out to the public, attendance is poor. One of the last urban rule plans that we've been working on for a section of the city, it's very difficult to get input. So we've had to spend a lot of time face-to-face outreach at different locations throughout that portion of the city. And even at that, the input we get is very limited and minimal. It's always easy to get input from the elderly because they are available and it's most easy. But to be honest, a lot of the times the input that we get isn't the input that we're necessarily looking for from a project. Like we're very diminished area that is creating. But we've had to now move to different tenant locations, just pop-up canopy locations of outreach, and whoever walks by, stops in, and so it's very time consuming. Public hearings, especially during COVID. I made a career as a consultant, and attending public hearings was what I did 4 days out of the week. COVID put a damper on that, although you could attend multiple meetings in one night now. That interaction with public bodies became very limited, and even now with GSPP and SMPO, although it's very convenient, you definitely lose something that you would normally get on a face-to-face interaction. So we struggle getting input. Most of the info the most success we had was with the Wall Street 79 stuff, and then also South Coast Rail. So those two super large projects. But we're talking about, you would have the school auditorium or the South Coast Rail project. 50 to 80 people would show up. It was very nice, the last one that we went to. But again, similar to this, half of the people in attendance are the project proponents. But we do have, you know, the same vocal minority that attends all the different events for days like that. So it's very difficult to get.
I'm just gonna say, when I worked on the Winter Kelly Square project, for example, we had to go really fast in a lot of groups that we worked with. And again, we did, you know, offer public engagement. MassDOT participated in public engagement. We were, you know, kind of partnering with the region on that project. But we had them, you know, had the churches and synagogue, and you name it, we had it. We had the pop-ups. We did a whole variety. And then from a right-of-way perspective, you know, you want to capture that. When I talk about right-of-way a little bit today, you're going to have to fill out what's called and this is required by federal highways. The requirements I'll talk about today are because there's federal money associated with these projects. You have to fill out with these, it's called a property owner contact diary for each owner. And so, you know, and I hate to say this, on municipal projects, there's always right-of-way. Right-of-way into temporary construction means property owners are entitled to the same rights as they are if you were taking their land. So you need to keep track of that. You want to keep track of that. We're audited on our projects, so the property owner contact diary is running, but they also help demonstrate support. And if there is turnover within the municipality, which there's a lot of turnover, the next person who's coming in and maybe meeting with that property owner has the history. Oh, this Mr. Smith went to this pop-up and we talked about, you know, there might be impacts to their property. It's just simple as that. And it can be handwritten. It doesn't have to be anything formal. It can be very simple, but it helps bring the support, because later on, when you're in the right-of-way acquisition process, you're going to hear from your abutters, no one ever told me about that project. I didn't know about that project. I hear that all the time.
Nobody knew about this meeting.
Correct. But then you pull up your property owner contact diary, and they were there and actually signed in. You know, like as an example, and it's not that you're trying to put it in their face, but it helps the next person. Because some of these projects, like we just walked through the district office, and I said, "See that project, Dyke Berkeley?" I said, "I worked on that project. Do you know when to PRC in 1974?" And I said, "I still know the project number on it, 7600, 4-digit number." But you know, in some of these projects, it can go on a very long time, and you can have a lot of turnover. And so having that history for the next person is so vital. And it will help with the environmental review. It'll help with the NEPA process, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. You have to get through that to be able to produce certain parts right away. And so it's important that you get this public engagement. It's critical.
We found through very pointed public notification, just simply notifying all directed butters to the project by certified mail. Beginning here, planning on this week. Our mail invoices are, but that's really the way to, again, dot your i's, cross your t's, and engage with people that are out there. We often have our consultants knock on doors, so that we can try and get that input up front. As stated, you don't want to get halfway up the project, and then I'll find out you have 3 hours. Just a general public hearing, very minimal. So you have to work a little bit harder and try and make direct connections to specific parties that have specific getting into it.
So the reason I asked, and I know that MPO staff received this recently from our federal partners at FHWA. There's new guidance about how the funding for unified planning work program, staff funding for planning activities can be programmed. And among the new ways in order to improve public engagement are on things like food. If MPO boards meet during the lunch or dinner hours, and that's frankly like the only time that busy staff in their days can fight, and they have to choose between, you know, their personal well-being or like the region's well-being. that's now an eligible expense. Or one that I thought was really interesting, would really revolutionize public engagement, is daycare is now potentially an eligible expense for public engagement. So rethinking about where we're hosting events and if that capacity is necessary in order to get more feedback, like if there's a safe routes to school project or a project in your non-elementary school or daycare center that you want feedback from those stakeholders, having daycare for those public meetings would be very beneficial. We've never done that before in terms of using federal funding for that, but as that's identified as a new way we can develop our programs, we kind of depend on you all to tell us how that would go about. And I know we're going to be working with MPO staff on figuring out what
Yeah.
that'll look like in the future. We had questions about it too, but that's the type of feedback that we welcome in terms of how to better engage the public.
I know some smaller communities that surround us that are town government, they often provide daycare at their 1 or 2 weeks. Also, cities have to do at this point. But yeah, potentially do something that has to be
Sorry, I just
Yeah,
wanted to-
no, thank you for bringing that up. And the food thing, it's a big deal that I've been asking about since I been in this role too. Because that, people have to skip dinner, with their families and everything to come to a meeting. That is a barrier sometimes, and not getting to eat until like 9 p.m. But yeah, no, that's great. And I was actually just going to mention some strategies to try to engage, to try to bring more people to meetings. And I know that COVID has, after COVID has made everything more difficult, participation in person still lagging, but just some ideas to put out there. So the formal design hearings, also some people might not be as comfortable speaking at those meetings. So we encourage you to maybe reach out to community leaders and work together to help organize the meetings, maybe do drop-in style workshops where you have project updates set up and people can come and go, talk to staff, maybe office hours kind of thing. So it's not as huge a restriction on their schedule. Doing neighborhood meetings, like we mentioned, really meeting people where they're at, and going to the places that they're comfortable and go to all the time. And then another supplemental channel to kind of use for people who don't want or can't go to meetings, maybe have an opportunity for written comment, on the city or town website to submit comment, or having paper comment cards at the town hall is an idea too.
Can I just step in for a second? I want to say, Andrea, when we were doing our regional transportation plan, we reached out to all our communities and asked them to post our survey on their website, and the numbers just skyrocketed. So community websites are a great resource.
Yep. Yeah, that helped a lot for our survey response. Sure.
Keeping the record open on public hearings for written comment is great, but insist that they sign their name. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you can't imagine the comments you get.
And if you want to follow up with folks later on too, you want to have their contact information. But yet we have experience that much. So some best practices for reaching underrepresented groups. So before you start outreach, you need to ask who lives and works on and uses the roadway and corridor, and what accommodations are required to meaningfully communicate with these populations. So the aim should be engaging the immediate neighborhood, but also generally all the users of that roadway. So engaging the public in, expanding the public engagement area. So it's important to not only include vulnerable populations in outreach efforts, especially areas like Fall River, New Bedford, Taunton, Attleboro, the cities, Wareham, areas that do have more of these communities, but to make intentional efforts and take some extra time to engage them, because most of these groups are less likely to participate and attend public meetings, and they're often, vulnerable road users. Historically, especially racial minorities and limited English proficient communities have been disproportionately represented in pedestrian and bike crashes. And they're going to be impacted by projects, and we want to make sure that they're also aware of project updates and that they have the opportunity to voice their concerns or support. So if a project falls, for example, within a limited English proficient an area with a high LEP community, you should make an effort to like translate flyers and meeting materials, provide interpretation, bring a tablet with Google Translate, less effort, but if you're going to do a virtual meeting, use closed captioning with translation. And then if it makes sense, partnering with community organizations to hold the meeting in people's native languages and gather feedback in their languages directly. That's the 5-star strategy. It does, all of these things do require, more time and effort. But that's part of what, making sure everyone's on board. That's what it requires. But once you build strong relationships with partners in the community, it becomes easier to do it later on again for other projects and be working together with those folks. So if the project falls in a high-low income, did you have a question?
No, I was just gonna say that the thing that I found increased public participation and attendance was portable electronic signs at all of the major intersections.
Yep.
And especially during COVID, putting the link so that they could get it, the Zoom link or whatever. And
Yeah, you mean
keep
the
it-
signs on the roads?
yeah,
Yeah.
right, and the major intersections.
Yeah, that's good to hear. That is something that we recommend doing more often, because everyone sees those when they're driving by, and then they'll be curious and they'll research it. Yep, that's great. That's working for you. So if the project falls in a high-low income population area, we suggest doing meeting locations along transit routes, and providing a remote option, maybe an option that doesn't require computer, broadcasting it on cable TV, rotating the meeting locations if possible. And then if you're in an area like, for example, Fall River, New Bedford, and the project falls near high Black, Indigenous, people of color population area, an effort should be made to hold meetings in neighborhood and community spaces that these folks are comfortable with. Tabling at local pop-up events that we mentioned, those are always, you talk to a lot of people at those. They're really good strategy. And making sure meeting and project information is shared with community leaders who have close relationships and really strong trust with their constituents and the people they work with. And then older adults, if the project is near, a larger older adult population, maybe hold meetings at the Council on Aging, and distribute meeting notices and project information to the COAs. And of course, like using large print on flyers and materials as a best practice. And then if it's near a high disability population, and some of these are best practice either way, if it's near a high disability population or not, holding it and ADA accessible meeting locations, providing the virtual meeting option like we mentioned, and closed captioning, providing sign language interpretation if it's requested and necessary, and making the website and meeting materials accessible for screen readers. And then lastly, youth and young adults are not a Title VI population, but they are often underrepresented in outreach and planning processes. And they make up a large, a sizable portion of bike and ped crashes and vulnerable road users. It is important to also reach out to them too. And if the project falls within or near a high youth population area, we suggest like sharing meeting and project information with our Safe Routes to School coordinators, because they are, at a lot of school events across the region. They're really great, Colleen and Bonnie in our region, and they're in touch with parents, with school personnel, so they can really help get the information out there and help connect you with youth, with parents, with these folks. And you might consider sharing meeting information like at YMCA's, Boys and Girls Club, youth commissions. I know Taunton has one. If you want to try different approaches to engage with folks and think innovatively about the reaching different communities. And then of course using simple language that they can understand. So for all of these populations, outreaching with agencies and community-based organizations who work closely with them is an important part of ensuring that the information gets to them and increases the likelihood, not always, but sometimes increases the likelihood that they'll participate in meetings and other project activities. So tapping into existing city-community relationships and building new ones is important, and it definitely does take time, but I argue that it's worth every effort you put into it, really. So this means like sharing flyers with them at a minimum, and project information, asking them to share meeting and project information through their channels, personally inviting their staff to the meetings that you do, and reaching out to them and their constituents like on a one-on-one basis to get their feedback and talk to them about what you're going to do. So we're in the process of kind of creating a directory of community-based organizations by town, which will encourage you to reach out to help engage more community members in the planning process. And it will also include bike and ped advocacy group members in the region. And this might be more helpful, if there's more turnover. Some of you might already be familiar with these folks, but you will have that as a shared resource to use, and it'll be like a working document that you can, add to, and we'll all share it out with each other as a resource. And I'll send it out once that's finalized. We have 27 communities, so the list will actually never be complete because there's just so much out there. And then I also wanted to mention that SRPEDD staff, we have more detailed guidance about these components. So if you reach out, we are happy to give you more information and help you make connections with some of these folks. We did work more closely with a lot of community organizations through our CHST plan in the spring. So those are definitely folks that we can help you make connections with, and they're aware of SRPEDD's planning work, and happy to help in that area. So lastly, the project P&F asks you to describe public outreach that you did and opposition or support that was voiced from different groups. So please document your public engagement efforts. and the feedback you receive there, because it will have a weight on your application. And please, 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 please invite SRPEDD staff to your meetings and share the feedback with us that was collected there, because you know, we want to make sure that it's included in your application, and we're here to support you, and we want to give your project the credit that it deserves when you're competing for funding. And it, you know, it makes your application so much more competitive when you, and it saves time when you already, you know, we don't have to reach out because there's missing components and applications and that kind of thing. And I will take any more questions that folks have. Yes, John.
Andrea, I just wanted to just harp on that last point you made about documenting, you know, public engagement. You know, as we're going through the tip and we're grading each project, we're giving each project a numeric score. And so if we don't have any information about your public meeting, we can't give you those extra points. And so that really, at the end of the day, that really matters a lot, whether your project ultimately gets on the tip or not. If you're down a few points because you didn't, you know, send us, a photo of your public meeting or something like that, that could cost you your project years on the tip project. So it's really important that, you know, folks are following those best practices, but also documenting at the same time.
Yeah, as the person who generally does that evaluation criteria process, that's 9 times out of 10. If I reach out to somebody in a community meeting, that's why, it's because I don't know, I can't tell from the application if any public outreach is done. And more often than not, communities lose points on that type of engagement. And you're only looking, $26 million is a lot of money, but there are a lot of projects competing for that funding. So you want to give yourself every edge you can, but also that community engagement is so important for making sure your project moves forward. If you have a negative community interaction, it can kill a project. And 9 times out of 10, that's what I see kill a project. So,
And just to supplement that further, in addition to the formula funding that the region receives for TIP programming, we know that municipalities are able to apply for discretionary grant funding opportunities federally, like RAISE or recently Safe Streets for All grant program. And those competitive national grant programs also expect to see some sort of documentation about public outreach and engagement as well. And that could be a disqualifier or hurt you on these actually competitive and not just competing against your peer community.
we do know that communities try very hard at this, and it's very, very challenging. And we're here to support and help in any way that we can.
Yes, please reach out. I am always here to help, and I want to talk to all of you. So.
Anybody have any questions for Andrea? Great, thank you, Andrea. We're gonna have Pam from Right Away next. And then after that, we do have one more environmental permitting. Might go a little bit over, hopefully that's okay. We understand if you need to go, but very valuable information coming up, so you can stick around. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the invite. My name is Pam Markey. I'm with Municipal Right of Way. And I work with all the municipalities within the Commonwealth when they have a federal aid TIP project that MassDOT is advertising for construction bids. With me today is Nancy Knight. Nancy does tend to handle projects in this region along with Craig Sheehan. And we work as a team. I've been doing this position for over 20 years. I work with the municipalities on the roadways, the bridge projects, the safe school projects, and the bike paths. I work with from the city of Boston to the little town of Monroe, which has less than 100 people up on the Vermont line. One of the things you're going to hear, and you probably heard today, is there's lots of processes. You are using federal aid, and so there are a lot of requirements on the right-of-way process. And these requirements are not MassDOT. These are requirements that come into play when you use federal aid on a project. I put together a presentation. I wasn't quite sure how long I would have. I'm going to probably be speaking fairly quickly If I'm speaking too fast, please let me know. I'm just trying to get through as many of the slides as possible. And again, our group is here. We do want to help. We don't want to obstruct the process. We don't want to obstruct the project. But we have seen this trap doors on these projects for years and years and years. And, you know, like what you've heard from everyone today, public engagement is critical. Our bike path project, our roadway projects, our bridge projects, they've shaped, they've changed, they've morphed over the years. Our cross sections are getting wider. The wider our cross sections are getting, the more removal of on-street parking, that creates controversy, and people get concerned about their takings. Even if they don't personally own the land, they use it as if it's theirs, and it becomes an issue. And for municipalities, when they're acquiring private property or public property, they have to, if they're a town form of government, they have to go through town meeting approval. If they're a city, they have to go through the city council approval. Those approvals and the select board votes, those approvals, you know, you need that support. And, you know, we see many times that projects don't progress or they can't get the support because of abutters who are complaining about the project or stakeholders who are complaining about the project and the impacts to them. It happens more than not. And so, you know, that's part of the reason why it's important to keep everything documented, to talk about the process, and to understand that even if you're just temporarily using people's property, that's still an easement, and you still have to probably go through that eminent domain process. And again, these processes kick into play. Okay, so just give me a second here. Okay, so again, community compliance section, we're a group of 10 people. We have some civil engineers, land surveyors, transportation planners, and right-of-way agents who will help work with you to get your project through to advertising. We review the right-of-way plans. We review them at the pre-25% design level, the 25% design level, the 75%, the 100, and the 100% plan specs and estimates. Our goal is to assist the municipalities through the acquisition process to make sure that all federal and state regulations have been complied with and followed with. And we help them through the process so that we can recommend right-of-way certification to the Federal Highway Administration, which allows the project to be eligible for funding certification. Okay, I put this up here to kind of like make everybody sort of laugh, but this is the process. And this is, I don't expect you to understand this, to see this, but this is like the entire process. And I'm going to try to break it down in the next slides, but I just kind of wanted to give everybody an idea of the right-of-way process. I mean, it's time consuming, it's expensive. You have to do title work, you have to do appraisals, you have to put procurements out for those services. You have to pay for recordings at the Registry of Deeds. There's lots of certified mailings that need to be done. And your right-of-way costs can cost about 1/3 of your design costs on the project. They can be very expensive depending upon the area of the state that you're working in, the property values, the number of easements needed, and the types. So at the pre-25% stage, we heard a lot about the different processes at MassDOT, PRC approval, pre-PRC approval. And so once the project actually becomes a project and it's recognized as a MassDOT project number, we get involved in the project from the community compliance section. We'll be involved as early as you want us to be. If you are the project proponent and it's your project and you need help with some municipal scoping, we'd be happy to provide input on that. It's important that you think about your land that you may need to acquire. Any land that is federally or state owned would have additional restrictions and take a longer process to go through. The municipality and MassDOT doesn't have the ability to acquire property by eminent domain against a publicly owned state or federal entity. So if there's land owned by the post office, it's by negotiation only. That could take you potentially 2 years. It's just a very lengthy, time-consuming process. And when we talk about the acquisitions, we need to get the design to a certain point, the right-of-way to a certain point, and we need to have approved right-of-way plans before you go through any of these processes. Because if the configuration or the square footage or the use of an easement changes by 1 square foot, the property owner has to be told of the change. The appraiser has to go back out. The review appraiser has to come in with a new just compensation dollar amount, and the right-of-way plans have to change. And that can easily cost you 8 months of a project. So it's really important that you can't start parts of the right-of-way until the right-of-way plans are approved and the design is locked down. Some other things we have to be careful of is railroads. Railroads they're very challenging to get through the process. Pan Am was recently divested, and you know, we found that Genesee and Wyoming and CSX picked up a lot of their properties. They typically require $4,000 or $5,000 review just on a temporary easement. You don't even know if you're going to get it. They're going to require that so that they can go through the process and they can do the engineering review and the legal review to decide if they're even going to work with you on the municipal level. So those are some things you have to kind of think about when you're thinking about what type of impacts may we have in the corridor. Some of the early upfront things you should be looking for is Article 97 properties. So Article 97 properties are properties that are held, they have a restriction on them. And we have to go through what's called, we would have to go to legislation and get a 2/3 roll call vote to change the use of the land from something that was being held for public conservation purposes to now to be able to be used for transportation projects. And sometimes bike path projects will still trigger it, because if it was a farm, for example, and it had an agriculture preservation restriction on it, a bike path is not considered a compatible use, and that you have to go through that process. And that process can take about 2 years. It can take a little bit longer. Article 97 was recently codified in February of 2023, and the requirements have changed. We're still waiting for the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs to give us formal guidance and open their online portal, which would help move the processes forward. But until we get that formal guidance, it has put a slight hiccup with the Article 97 properties, and it is taking a little bit longer. So again, I'm kind of pointing these out because those are your trapdoors. Those are things that are going to slow you down in your project. If you have a public utility, National Grid, railroad corridor, or an old railroad corridor that now National Grid owns, you're going to have to work with them. And again, they're usually protected under FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So you can't acquire that property by eminent domain if it's within those railroad corridors. You're going to have to work with them, their engineering staff, and their legal team to help move your project forward. We've done it for many years. We have great success, but it's all early coordination, lots of planning, lots of outreach. And again, you as a municipal liaison really need to be the champion in your project and make sure that, again, you have more than one person involved. So if somebody does step down from your team or, moves away, that you have somebody who can easily step in and take over where you left off. You don't want to create delays in your project. So at the 25% design stage, usually that's when most of the projects come in with a design plan, and we will perform a review. We're one of many sections that will perform a review. So I have a PE and a PLS that performs the review. I do check over every review comment to make sure that they're consistent based on the type of project that's going to be advertised for construction. So we have like independent utility, logical terminus, all the things we need to help make sure our project is successful. And then we give those comments to the MassDOT project manager. Usually after that, there is a 25% district utilities constructability engineer do swap. They go out with the utility companies. We will usually get a set of revised right-of-way plans after that. Usually not significant changes, but there may be some utility changes on it. At the 25% design public hearing, there is a community compliance officer who will go and attend the meeting. We are required by federal law to read a statement that lets the public know that each property owner is entitled to an appraisal, a review appraisal, and just compensation. And again, we are required to read that because the projects do receive federal aid. We are there to also answer any questions that we can. If an abutter or just anyone in the public or stakeholder has a question, for MassDOT about the right-of-way process. After the design public hearing, there's a 10-day public comment period. There are a lot of comments that come in. We want to have comments that come in, and the design engineer does have to respond to each of those comments in writing, and it becomes part of the official MassDOT design public hearing transcript. At this time, 2 letters are sent to the municipal liaison. One is sent from me, and it just kind of explains who the community compliance officer is that's assigned to your project, as well as some of the guidelines and requirements. The right-of-way process is very rigorous because, again, in most instances, you are using the eminent domain process. And, you know, we kick into, you can't take property without just compensation. It's you know, part of the Fifth Amendment. It's, again, there's state law on it, and there's also federal. And then some municipalities have their own individual requirements. For example, the town of Plymouth. Plymouth is required to have their own separate eminent domain hearing. We have another one, Wellfleet. They have a special requirement. So there are some nuances, and if you're new to a town, I would suggest you make sure that you check with your legal counsel and look at the bylaws to see how you can acquire property rights within your community, to see if there's anything, any special nuances needed. And it's important because if you have a project on the current tip year or the following tip year, you want to be working on your project schedule because you want to keep your project. You don't want your right of way to fall behind, or, you know, ideally we don't want it to fall behind. And we don't want to find we need to have a special hearing or something else that's needed that we didn't anticipate in the project schedule. Because as we get closer to September, we start to get really nervous about the project's eligibility and what the next replacement project is. We don't want to see your project getting replaced. The second letter is from the community compliance officer. And in this letter, they send over, you know, a lot of information. The most important one is the federal aid acquisition guide. And that's something you're going to have to send out certified mail to all of your abutters as the project moves forward. And there's a whole group. And we break them down. We'll give you everything, but then we'll piecemeal it to you at the right time in the process. You know, it's kind of like in the beginning, you might only be speaking to us once a month, and then it's a couple of times a week, and then it could even be a couple of times a day. And that's kind of how the projects come into play as you're getting closer to your advertising date. So if you're a town and you need to acquire property, you need to acquire right-of-way, even temporary construction easements, you need to have town meeting approval. If you're using eminent domain, it's a 2/3 supermajority vote. Many times I have seen the town meeting approval pass by a majority, but not get the supermajority vote, because sometimes, as you know, only the people who are, you know, find a project important come out to support it, or after the school budget has been voted, everybody leaves. I don't know if that happens in your town, but we see that a lot in a lot of different towns. So it's really important that you work to build confidence in your project, that you discuss the issues, that you tease those issues apart, and you try to come up with solutions. The solutions may not satisfy everybody, but you do your best to try to satisfy the issues and the concerns. One thing I will tell you, and I can't begin to stress this enough, is do not overpromise or overcommit to the solution until you know you have a viable engineering solution that can solve it. It's very, very hard to tell somebody, we're going to give you parking, and then find out you can't give them parking. And that's how people get upset. So you really always want to be careful that whoever your municipal liaison is, who's working with the public, is, you know, really understands what they're talking about, and that they're not overcommitting or overpromising to the abutters. It's harder to reverse that than just to have somebody who's a little bit upset at the beginning. Another thing at town meeting approval you're going to need is you may need to secure your right-of-way costs. You're going to have to do a title exam on every property that's affected. You're going to have to do an appraisal, a review appraisal. And those are appraisals done by certified general appraisers. So that's usually starts at $3,000 in appraisal per property. Title work could be $300 and up per property, depending upon the complexity of the title. And then you're going to have to secure right-of-way costs for your just compensation to property owners. We just did a project in Watertown. It's a very large project, over 200 owners, and it was over $2 million in right-of-way costs. Now, that being said, those were just the payments. That being said, it was over a $20 million project. So, you know, the return on investment is good, but it was expensive right away. And people think that, oh, well, you can get a donation. Well, you might be able to get a donation after you offer the property owner the right to an appraisal and just compensation. And in order to get a donation, you have to get your lender sign off. The lender has to sign off because otherwise you're violating the mortgage agreement and the bank could recall the mortgage. We don't want to see that happen to your property owner, especially with interest rates today. And then you also have to look at your right-of-way plans. And again, our community compliance officers will work with you on this. But if you have alterations to your roadway and you're a town meeting, you need to time that in because select board authorization for eminent domain doesn't expire. But what does expire is layouts and layout alterations. They're only good for 120 days in Massachusetts. That's Mass General Law. So we have to time that with your takings. So sometimes you'll need more than one town meeting. But again, we'll work with you on it. We'll make sure it's in the project schedule. We'll plan for it and we'll be successful. So I kind of lumped the 75 and 100% in at the same time. This is more your final design. You should know all your grading impacts at this point. Kind of at the 25%, you're more in 2D. 75 to 100%, you're more in 3D. From a right-of-way perspective, there's not a lot of changes. We're just making sure all the review sections comments have been addressed. We're making sure they're all reflected on the right-of-way plans. Those right-of-way plans, again, you're paying a lot of money to have this work done. You want to make sure you're not paying to redo an appraisal. You're not paying to add things in. So we want to make sure we're at those approved plans, and it's usually a second or third submission of a 75% design, or it's at a first or second submission of 100%. And then the Safer to School, they run a little bit differently. Those are combined, smaller, less complicated projects. Those tend to be at a 75, 100 combined. So, but anyways, in the final design stage, this is when it all comes together. If you haven't done your title work at 25%, you need to do your title work. If it's been a while since your title work's been done, you want to have your legal counsel perform a title rundown to make sure before you go contact all these people, you're contacting the right people. You don't want to go back and do your work. So just assume at this point we have approved right-of-way plans, the design's locked down, you have good title information. Now what you need to do is you need to reach out to all your property owners in writing and send them a letter of intent, letting them know about the project. Of course, they should already know, but this is like the formal process. This has to be sent certified mail with a copy of the approved right-of-way plans, clearly showing what the impacts are to the property owner's property. If you have a drainage easement, you spell that out. If you have a temporary easement, you spell that out. If you need to take the temporary easement for 5 years, you spell it out. If it's a type of project where it's maybe 2 bridges going in a bundle and the first one is going to be the detour route for the second one, you may need 8-year temporary easements. We put that all in there. You want to put that in there. And the community compliance team, we're going to work with you. So send us your draft letter. We're going to make sure that there's nothing in it that won't preclude the use of the federal funding. We'll give you the green light to go ahead with it. We'll help work with you, your legal counsel, your team, to make sure that everything you're sending out complies with all of the requirements. And again, and then if you want, you can submit a donation certificate. Again, they're very hard to get, especially with the property values being so high. Most people are not signing off on that. So again, at this point, that's the first thing that you need to send out, and it has to be sent out certified mail. And we have to collect the copies of the certified mail. We can just take a copy of it. Okay, so we talked about this. Now, when we get to the approved right-of-way plans, when we're getting close to the approved right-of-way plans, we're looking at your project's design schedule. So we're kind of like having an idea of when that plan may come in. We'll know from looking at the previous submission and the comments and other reviewers' comments how close we may be to approving those right-of-way plans for acquisition. So we're going to talk to you about scheduling your appraiser inspection. So we're going to start talking to you about hiring your appraiser. Some municipalities, this is what they know how to do. They can do it very easily. There are procurement laws that come into play depending upon the amount. So if you have a small bridge, you only have 4 abutters, maybe 6, just say you have to connect a sidewalk or something. You're probably going to be under your thresholds and you can probably just send out 3 RFPs. But you may be in a situation where you may need to do more than that. So you're gonna need to work with your procurement officer within your municipality to figure out what's needed, but you're gonna need to talk to a minimum of 3 appraisers in any event and start getting prices and finding out when they can deliver your projects. Now, since we're only using certified general appraisers, which is required by federal highway, there's only so many in Massachusetts. And we can't recommend a certain appraiser for you, but we can give you a list of a number of them that have worked successfully within your region that you may want to reach out to if you don't have appraisers on board already, or we'll give you the names of municipal contacts in neighboring towns who just went through a project, and you can call them. We'll suggest that you call them and say, how did the appraiser do? Were they on time? Did they deliver to budget? Did they go back and ask for anything additionally? Your appraiser is it's critical in the process. So you've sent out the letters of intent. You got the appraiser coming up, but before the appraiser can come up, you have to conduct a property owner interview. So your municipal liaison has to go out and conduct a property owner interview with each property owner. You have to offer it. Now, if they choose not to do it, that's fine. You note it in the property owner contact diary that I talked about earlier. Every type of contact is noted in the property owner contact diary. You want that in case you're audited, you can show that you've gone through the process, you've given the abutters their notifications and the rights to weigh in on the project. So you go out, you interview the property owner. If they want to be interviewed, you walk the affected area, you show them what trees are coming down. They may talk to you about minor things that maybe we can make minor tweaks on the design on, or not. That's something between you and your consultant to work out, but that is something that is required by federal highway to be done. Then following the property owner interview is the appraiser. The appraiser has to send a certified mailing to the property owner offering to walk the impacted area with the property owner. So we have to build that into the schedule. We build in 120 days on average for the appraisal process. That's from when you've hired the appraisal. It may only take 30 days. We just don't know. If you have 4 owners, it'll probably take 40 days. If you have 200 owners, you might need more than the 120 days. And again, we'll work with you and your design consultant on that when we review those monthly schedules that we do get from your design consultant. And it's important. You should be asking your designer to give you copies of those monthly schedules so you can see if you're making the milestone, and if you're not, what the critical path is. So after your appraisal, then the appraiser sends their appraisal to the review appraiser. The review appraiser goes through and they accept or reject the appraiser's valuation determination of just compensation. The just compensation report is needed before you can send out your 30-day written offer to the property owners. So at this point, now what you need to do is you need to send out your 30-day written offer to each of the owners. It has to be in writing. They have to receive that Federal Aid Property Owner's Guide again, that sketch of the property, and the just compensation report, which tells them how much money they're entitled to for the appraisals, for the impacts to their property. And the property owner has to have 30 days. That has to happen, so you have to take into account the mailing. Every day counts, the weekends do count with that, which is good. But the certified mailings, if you have a lot of them, it can take a little bit of time to put together. And then after that, your select board or your city council can vote to then acquire the property by eminent domain or deed grant if it's going to be by deed grant. And then that would happen. Obviously, as the right-of-way process is going and being finalized, usually the plan specs and estimates come in, and we are hoping that there are no changes. Sometimes when you're on the ocean, coastal zone management could weigh in. They may want something last minute. We have projects in being advertised this year. We're at 100%. We had utility changes. We moved 11 utility poles from one side of the street to the other. Wasn't super pleased about it, but we're gonna work with the community to try to help them get their project advertised and try to strategize how can we still keep it in the ag year? What can we do? How can we prioritize it? I'm going to prioritize the review on my end. I'm gonna make sure we do everything on our power to help you keep your project going, because then those right-of-way plans with the poles changed, they have to be reapproved. And then you may have to go get more title work, appraisal, review appraisal, and we can't cut out that 30-day written offer. And again, those owners are also entitled to a property owner interview. So, you know, your instruments and taking plans, your design consultant does need to prepare the recordable plan for the project. Sometimes it's just easement plans. Sometimes it's easement plans and alterations. And again, we'll work with you on that. If we do have alterations, you typically would need planning board endorsement. And we have to account for that. But again, we're gonna when we sit with you early on in the project, we're gonna coordinate that with you to know if we're gonna need that planning board endorsement on those recordable plans, and make sure that when we're calculating it in the right-of-way process, that we're putting that in there so that you know about it and we know about it, because that's very important. And then we're going to work with your legal counsel to review your instrument. So whether they're deed grants, an order of taking, it's really important. Again, everything matches up. If your appraisals were done for 5 years, you can't take your easements for 10 years. It has to match. I know that sounds strange, but sometimes the attorneys just may not be familiar with it if they haven't done a MassDOT project before. We do require a minimum of 5 years temporary construction easement on all projects. That's at a minimum, and the reason is the bidding process usually takes us 6 months to 8 months from when we issue the right-of-way cert to the contractor getting the notice to proceed. You're burning off almost through a year with that. And then again, these projects are more and more complicated. The cross sections are getting larger. They're taking longer. We've had a lot of cases where municipalities, when they only took easements for 3 or 4 years, they had to go back because of delays with COVID. They had to go back and do that whole process again. And you can't use that old appraisal because it's stale dated. It doesn't apply anymore. Appraisals are good only for a certain number of months. So, you know, it's better to have pay for the easement for an additional year or 2 and make sure you don't have to go through this process again. Because if we run into construction delays, the contractor can, you know, put in demands because they didn't have the right of way to do the project. So we don't want to see that happen, especially if it's a municipal project because of the 110% design agreement. So we don't want to see the municipality running into a situation where, you know, if there's contractor delays because they can't get onto the property because the easement's expired, we don't want to see you having to pay for that.
Hey, Pam,
Yes.
if there's ever a change on the tip for an ad year because of a sequencing concern with multiple projects, how is that communicated to the municipality if there's right-of-way extensions, or not extensions, the temporary access permit timing extension needs? Is that from your office or?
So are you saying like a project's moving back?
Yeah, like for instance, I think in Quincy, we had like 3 active projects, and even though they were all ready at the same time, to minimize disruption and mitigate traffic concerns in the community, they were all added to different years. But because they were initially all ready at the same time, something had to have been communicated to Quincy officials if there were right-of-way concerns that made sure that they wouldn't have to go through this process multiple times.
So
who's responsible in that case?
So, you know, it varies on the project. So is MassDOT the proponent or is the municipality the proponent? That kind of can come into play a little bit. Usually, well, for example, with Quincy, fortunately, they hadn't acquired any of their right of way. So we didn't have to worry about that with Quincy. You know, some municipalities, that's why they wait to the very end to acquire their right of way, because sometimes things can change. But I mean, I've never had a municipal right of way project in 20 years where they ran into an issue where they acquired easements and the project got moved back. I just haven't had that actually happen. So that hasn't happened, which is good. But if we thought there was a delay in a project, we're going to say, hey, hold off on your easements. Don't go in acquiring. Like we have some design issues or environmental permitting issues, or maybe we can't get a Coast Guard permit, or maybe there's something else that's going on. I don't want you going forward. Just let's wait and see, you know, let's hold off, just pause for a month or 2. And, you know, we're going to work with like MassDOT leadership and the MPO on that and the designer and just kind of see where we need to be, because we don't want to see that happen. Again, this is just an example of the notifications that have to be sent, again, certified mail. So after your select board vote, your city council vote, under Mass General Law, you have 30 days to record at the Registry of Deeds those plans and instruments. And you know, each town's different. Some towns, they need to have certain actions done with the treasurer's office, or their city solicitor has to do something. It just depends on the individual needs of the community. So we're going to work with you and your team. We're going to kind of ask you a lot of questions so that we have a better understanding of what your community needs to help make sure that you can get your project on record within 30 days. We ideally like to see it on within like the first 10, in case there's an issue. I mean, there are some registries that will kick the plans back, especially if you're dealing with land court, registered land. If it's not perfect, they're kicking it back. And that's a process. And we don't want to see you have to potentially go back and revoke that 30 days, because especially in the summer, some municipalities, like, they require 2 city council readings before city council will vote. And they may be on a summer session where they only meet once a month. Well, in order to advertise a project within the current fiscal year, the last day I can usually certify is the end of August, because I have to get the right-of-way cert over to Federal Highway. Now, that's just to make the fiscal year. We don't want to push them that far. We want to make your ad date. So, you know, we try to equally balance our advertising program. It's better for the contractors, it's better for bidding, it's better for everybody involved. So, you know, if you have a May ad date, we don't want to push you to September because you've missed your 30 days and now you have to go back and have 2 city council readings that only come once a month. And now we're getting towards the end of the year, because you still have a lot of paperwork to do, unfortunately, at this point. So what happens is, after you record at the Registry of Deeds, you then have to notice not just all the property owners, you have to notice all the lenders. So every lender has to get notified. You don't have to send it certified mailing to the lenders, but you do have to send the notification of the taking to each of the property owners certified mail. And you have to let them know about that taking. And, you know, at that point, you probably want to include your W-9, because, you know, property owners are unfortunately taxed on those takings. And one other thing is you know, what you're going to be doing is, when you make out your checks to your property owners, you also have to put their lender name on it. And then it's up to the property owner to either see if the bank will apply it to their mortgage, or to get the mortgage lender sign off, so that the property owner can cash the check. So when you're talking to your property owners, make sure to let them know that the check will be made out to them and anybody with an interest, because, again, you know, it's supposed to be protecting private property owners' rights, and that's part of the protection. Again, we don't want to see anybody's mortgage recalled, and you also don't want the bank to come after you with the municipal officials saying you didn't pay us our just compensation. And because they, you know, do hold paper on the property, they are entitled to that compensation as well. And under Massachusetts general law, you have up to 60 days to pay the private property owners. If they don't send their W-9 in, if they don't send their paperwork in, you can escrow the money. You don't have to, you know, you have to wait for them to provide you the information, but you do have to be able to tender payment in the event they came in. And we can't issue the federal aid right-of-way certificate until everybody who submitted their W-9s has had their payment tendered. So that's why I said, like, if you are in August and you have a city council meeting and then you record, you have to do a lot of work to get us to be able to certify it for the end of the year. Again, if you have 4 owners, it's not a big deal. But if you have volume will always slow you down. About every 20 owners slows you down, just to kind of give you an idea. And if you have mixed type of properties, that's like, if it's residential, commercial, industrial, that's going to slow your appraiser down. So kind of keep that in mind. What kind of zoning am I dealing with here? Just things to consider. Again, this is the right-of-way certificate, which we issue to the Federal Highway Administration. It has on it different types of acquisitions, the day of the order of taking, the day it was recorded, when the written offer was sent. And just to give everybody a heads up, The written offer cannot be sent until NEPA has been approved. So we're coordinating with the environmental section the entire time. We can't, that would be a violation. So we have to be super careful of that. I know we're kind of out of time, so I'm just trying to get through as much as I can. Trapdoors, if you are dealing with a utility company, you will probably end up with a 99-year lease. MBTA, CSX, National Grid, there's certain language that has to be put in the lease agreement. It's required, or we can't certify the right of way. We'll work with you on it. We know what the requirements are. So we'll help you through that process. Have a bunch of best practices. Again, comprehensive scope of design services. Look for publicly owned open space. Identify your property owners. Have a good municipal liaison. Set budget expectations. Think about your town meeting votes, your select board or city council votes, recording dates. Follow up with your design consultant at every phase of the project. Your design consultant, while they might have sold you a great project, they are working on many great projects. So make sure you're championing your project. Again, work with your legal counsel. Do not omit the ability of the municipality to acquire by eminent domain, even if you think everybody's giving you a donation. If somebody dies intestate, you don't have the ability to clear the right of way. Super important. You have to have that in there. Communicate frequently. It's important. We want to address issues before they become issues or problems. I guess that's it. So I hope that was helpful. Be happy to come back at any time if anybody wants more information on it. We have a great team. That's what we solely do, is work with the municipalities. Again, we work with some really tiny towns, we work with some larger cities. We try to create, we'll try to work with you based on your resources, the risk of the project. Some projects are really easy to deliver, some are more complicated. Some of these projects we've worked on for over 15 years. They just take a while, and some can go through really quickly. So, any questions? Sure, absolutely.
You're scared.
Okay. No, well, and I don't want to. I know it's a lot. I didn't want to scare you, but yeah, we'll help you through it.
Alrighty. I'm sure you guys see the source right now. Here's my presentation. So I'll try to kind of move efficiently since I know we're short on time. My name's Alex LaMarche. I'm with MassDOT Environmental's MEPA-NEPA group here in Boston. So I'm kind of just going to take you through what we do and how environmental permitting works into the project timeline. This is our group at a recent site visit. We're broken up into a few different sections, including wetlands and waterways, wildlife, hazmat, construction compliance, MEPA-NEPA, salt remediation, and a couple others. So just like I said, today we're going to go over kind of what we do in terms of identifying environmental resources, and we're going to talk a little bit about the permitting and common regulations that we work with. When you see these symbols here, it refers to whether we're talking about state or federal regulation. So just to start us off, how does our team identify critical environmental resources? There's two main ways: desktop analysis and field visits. So first, obviously, we'll do our desktop analysis with different GIS tools, and in certain circumstances, for certain bridge projects or areas in rare species habitat, we conduct field visits as well. So this is the environmental review checklist. It's replacing what formerly held this kind of role, which was the early environmental coordination checklist. It's essentially our first document and nexus for recording all the potential resources and impacts associated with a project. So our job is to fill this out. My team does at the pre-25% stage during scoping. And then we'll send it over to the designer to fill out and respond to any questions, comments, concerns that we might have to send back with the 25% submission. So just getting into a couple of examples of our desktop analysis. Typically, we look at aerials initially. This is for a bridge project down in Walpole over a river. So this is kind of where we can see, where some environmental resources might be. Obviously, river is considered a wetland, so this is the critical one on this project. This is a mass mapper layer that kind of shows some modeled wetland layers. Oftentimes, this can be used to sort of just give us a rough guess on whether wetlands will be impacted or not. Once we have a good idea, we usually want, proper in-field wetland delineations completed to get those boundaries down completely. This is a FEMA layer. It shows flood hazards associated with waterways. So when we see this, we obviously know there might be some concern if there's any cut or fill within that FEMA flood zone. We could have to go through something called a no-rise analysis. And finally, like USGS maps are really useful for determining whether streams are perennial or intermittent, and just giving us a general sense of what the project environment looks like. Sorry, that was second to last one. This one is the open space layer that we use a lot to figure out whether Article 97 protected properties, Section 4F protected properties are near a project that might be impacted or have right-of-way requirements. Basically, anywhere where there's a potential for wildlife conservation or park use, public recreational use. So this is just an example of what we would like to see from design plans in terms of a permitting situation. Typically, we want to see the actual resources highlighted, like you can see here, and with impact areas shaded and labeled accordingly. Sometimes when we get plans, they don't have these, and you kind of have to guess where the impacts are, but it's really great when designers clearly label them on their plans. So a little bit on timing. Typically by 25%, we want to have a clear understanding of what permits will be needed, what the impacts are, and what the permits that will be needed for those impacts are. And then within the 75 to 100% stages when we expect draft permits to review. So our team will review permits, submit comments to designers, and kind of facilitate that process. We like to see draft permit applications by 75. Wetland permits in particular have a tendency to hold projects up. So sometimes if they don't come in till 100, there's really not enough time to revise or change the design if it's needed from an environmental standpoint. So we really like to get those draft permits at 75. So a little bit into the types of wetland regulations that we work with. The Wetland Protection Act is the big state level wetland regulation that we work with. It protects essentially all wetlands, waterways within the state, as well as some buffer zones. So there's a 100% or 100-foot buffer zone associated with bordering vegetated wetlands, which are wetlands that border a water body. 200 feet for riverfront. So it's basically measured from the center of a perennial stream, 200 feet out. Those are all jurisdictional under the Wetlands Protection Act. There's two kind of processes that can happen if we're just impacting buffer zone and it's very minimal. Occasionally we can go through what's called an RDA, to request for determination of applicability. And what we're looking for is a negative determination, essentially saying that, this work is not subject to Wetland Protection Act clearance. And then the typical form of permitting that, the document that is associated when there are impacts with a project is called a notice of intent. And what we're hoping to get from the issuing authority, which can be either the local conservation commission or DEP in some cases, we're looking for that order of conditions, which basically authorizes the work under a set number of conditions. We work with stream crossing standards a lot for culvert replacements and bridge replacements. Essentially, what these standards are to have your structures designed so that the river or stream underneath it isn't constricted. It usually allows for wildlife passage, fish and aquatic species to easily connect through the crossing. So some things that we look at are like openness ratios, bankful width, which is the measurement from basically where the river goes into a floodplain. Having the structure at 1.2 times that width gives it a good width for the stream to kind of move around under the structure and for wildlife passage as well. It's also looking at, what kind of materials at the bottom of the crossing. We like to see, natural material being used. So these are just a couple examples of, past culverts that were replaced in line with the stream crossing standards. One thing to note is that we must meet the stream crossing standards completely for any new crossings. For replacements, though, we have to meet them to the maximum extent practicable. So that's sort of a process that starts during the bridge type selection worksheet, usually where we would like the designer to kind of justify if we're not able to meet a stream crossing standard, why, what alternatives were considered, that sort of thing. That's really important when we go into permitting. So another set of regulations that we work under are the Clean Water Act. So Section 401 is a state level regulation that protects just waters of the United States. So unlike the Wetland Protection Act, this is just the resources themselves. Buffer zones are not indicated with Section 401. This is reviewed by DEP, and it depending on the level of impact, it can go through different levels of review. If there's under 5,000 square feet of impacts, typically the order of conditions from the Wetlands Protection Act can serve as the water quality cert, so that doesn't require any extra application or permitting work. But if it's over 5,000 square feet, typically an individual separate water quality cert is required. So this is typically for projects that have dredge or fill directly within water bodies. It applies for Section 404 as well, which is administered by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's very similar, it's work directly within the resources, but there's some different permit determination types. Self-verification is for very minor impacts, where essentially we disclose the impacts associated with the project without full review from Army Corps. PCNs, pre-construction notifications, are the typical permitting that we apply for when we are subject to Section 404. And then individual permits are for really big projects. We don't go through that very often. Chapter 91 is a really interesting regulation that we work with. It's one of the oldest of its kind in the country. It essentially protects public access to waterfronts and coasts. So this is for any project that's, it's required for any project in filled tidelands, so former tidelands that have been filled. A lot of areas of Boston are like that. Current flowed tidelands, great ponds, which are water bodies that are over 10 acres or more in their natural state. So that's not including ponds that, have been enlarged based on, dam impoundment, that kind of thing. It's just in their natural state. This also applies to non-tidal rivers and streams. And so the question is, when is a stream subject to Chapter 91? It's typically if you can navigate it by a kayak. If it's, intermittent or it's not really navigable at all by a kayak, there's no access or what have you, we typically say that they are not Chapter 91 eligible. So we can get the clearance in the form of a waterway permit, a license, or a minor modification. The license typically can take anywhere from 9 months to a year. So this is one of those permit processes that we really like to know about early on in the design process, so that we have enough time to get that permit or that license before the project advertises. We work with wildlife and endangered species as well. On the state side, we have MISA, the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act, that protects habitats and prohibits taking of any, endangered listed animals or plants. It requires clearance through Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, which is a body under Division of Fish and Wildlife. We'll essentially coordinate with them, showing them the design plans and impacts to that habitat, and we're looking for a no-take determination from them. And there's got to be a net benefit if there is a take. So that might be, enhancing habitat, increasing habitat size. It's just that projects generally have to be a benefit to the endangered species of concern. Section 7 kind of deals with a similar thing from the federal side. It's required anytime a project goes through NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act. We'll talk about that in a bit. The big species of concern with Section 7 is northern long-eared bat. A lot of our projects, are on bridges that, might be sources for hibernaculum for these bats throughout the year. So typically we'll get that clearance in the form of an acoustic analysis survey is usually done for these types of bridges to determine whether northern long-eared bats have frequented those sites or not. And we get clearance in the form of either not likely to adversely affect, may adversely affect, or likely to adversely affect. And those determinations can determine things like time of year restrictions on the project, lighting restrictions, that sort of thing, to try to minimize impact. Protection of public land comes in a few different forms. On the state side, we have Article 97. Pam had the chance to talk a little bit about this. Our right-of-way group is typically in charge of making sure this goes to the legislature properly and that the disposition is mitigated appropriately. But this can have impacts on our end for MEPA, which is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. Section 4F is handled under NEPA, and it protects all publicly owned land that's used recreationally or for wildlife or waterfowl refuge. It also protects national, state, and local historic sites. Section 6F protects any properties that have received funding from the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act. This is another one of those ones that requires a little bit longer clearance. It can take up to a year. And so we want to know, do we have any right-of-way impacts on Section 6F land very early in the design process so we can go through that with National Park Service. So on the cultural and historic resources side, we have a couple different different avenues for how these reviews and clearances happen. We have a cultural resources unit in-house at MassDOT that reviews all projects for impacts to historic resources. Typically on the federal side, if we have federal funding and NEPA is a part of the project, the clearance is either through Section 106 or Section 4F. Like I said, it's usually in-house, depending on whether the property involved is considered nationally registered or is eligible for national registry. That can affect what outcome may come out of that, whether it's a no adverse effect or an adverse effect. And then on the state side, we have Chapter 254 for projects that do not receive any federal funding or don't have a federal nexus. So the National Environmental Policy Act and Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. This is what my group does specifically. On the federal side, NEPA is essentially its role is to make sure that all projects that have federal involvement can disclose any environmental impacts that it may have and discuss any mitigation and avoidance minimization efforts associated with the project. Whoops, excuse me. So there's various classes of actions with NEPA. Our most common, I would say 99% of our projects go through what are called categorical exclusions. It's essentially a set list of project types, bridge replacements, repavement, multimodal enhancements, bike path projects, things that are pretty common and are deemed to have minimal impact on the environment. We'll fill out these CEs, whether they're programmatic or individual, depends on the level of impact associated and whether Federal Highway needs to sign off or not. There's a couple other levels of review and documentation if a project is not eligible as a categorical exclusion. These include environmental assessments and environmental impact statements. Those are infrequent. So just really for very large projects. On the MEPA end, this is sorry, I forgot to mention that for NEPA, it's required anytime there's federal funding or a federal nexus. On MEPA's end, on the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act end, it's very similar. It's there to disclose impacts and discuss and make sure that the state is doing everything that it can to minimize, avoid, and mitigate environmental impacts associated with projects. But it has less to do with funding. It's for projects that receive some sort of state level funding, but it's only required when projects exceed certain impact thresholds. So some common ones are cutting 5 or more public shade trees, 14 inches or greater at breast height, certain amounts of land alterations, wetland impacts, rare species takes. It really, if you're not meeting any of those thresholds of, say 5,000 feet of bordering vegetated wetland impacts, you're not required to submit or go through MEPA review. Most bridge projects are exempt from this. I'll talk a little bit about that more later. Keeps one, skip that one. So depending on the level of impact, we submit what's either called an environmental notification form or an environmental impact report. There's certain thresholds that require a environmental impact report to be filed. Most recently, however, within the past year, MEPA has kind of changed their guidance and their regulations to include consideration of EJ populations. So if a project exceeds a MEPA threshold for an ENF, say that 5 public shade tree thresholds, and it's within a mile of an EJ population, we're also required to submit an environmental impact report, as well as go through enhanced public involvement steps and EJ impact analysis specifically. So our team at MassDOT reviews these sort of documents and kind of gives designers guidance on how to, edit and improve those submittals. We also have a salt remediation program at MassDOT that looks at impacts to our groundwater and various environmental resources associated with road salt use in the wintertime. A lot of it is a lot of their role is educating road maintenance crews on how to reduce their use of salt. There's also reports that they put together to discuss the various impacts associated with salt use. So the bridge exemption is a really important topic. We use this a lot on our bridge replacement or our bridge preservation projects. Essentially, it allows us to be exempt from certain environmental reviews, including MEPA, Chapter 91, and Wetland Protection Act. Article 97 compliance still applies. So if we're impacting Article 97 land, we still have to go through the typical mitigation associated with that. There are some criteria to use the bridge exemption. It only applies to structures that are being replaced or preserved or repaired and have a similar alignment and similar functionality, functional equivalence essentially to the existing bridge. So adding something like an extra through lane would not be considered functionally equivalent. However, safety improvements such as adding an auxiliary turning lane or shoulder or bike lane would allow for the bridge exemption to be used. So again, that's Chapter 91, MEPA, and Wetland Protection Act that this would allow us to be exempt from. Some other, various environmental review processes and permits that we work with are the National Pollutant Discharge and Elimination System, the POMP, which is our Programmatic Operation and Maintenance Plan for stormwater features, Watershed Protection Act, Coastal Zone Consistency for projects that are within coastal zone, Essential Fish Habitat, which is kind of worked under Section 7 with NEPA, U.S. Coast Guard. That's a big one for any projects that are working on bridges within tidal waterways or some of the major waterways within the state, including the Merrimack River, and Connecticut River. So those, basically if there's going to be a change to the cross section of the channel, for that would influence shipping or boating access, we're required to go through Coast Guard review. Hazmat is another one that we look at to look at any potential hazardous waste present on sites before construction begins. And then stormwater is another big one, looking at how we can meet stormwater standards the best that we can, depending on the project, and just improve general drainage on projects. So, and kind of in line with the stream crossing standards, we'll do fluvial geomorphology assessments to analyze, how a river is behaving and whether or not it's working in conjunction well with our roadways. Oftentimes, our roadways are, located in floodplains that was, typically the flattest, easiest land to, develop highways on. And so we now have to work on, how do we improve our roadway infrastructure to work alongside the natural features. So this is a really good example where we had, a roadway where that had retaining walls, right alongside this river corridor, and it was frequently, becoming an issue with flooding and maintenance. And so we did a project to kind of rehab that riverway corridor, provide more wildlife features and habitat here, and also kind of revive that floodplain so that any future high flow conditions, water had somewhere to go other than impacting that wall there. We do work to kind of benefit endangered species. So the orange salamoth is a big one, making sure that there's certain plant species along our roadside that they depend on. Kestrel nesting boxes are also located along I-91. We kind of maintain these to make sure that those kestrels have somewhere to nest. It's typically, what we do is we work with natural heritage, mass wildlife to, do bandings and that kind of thing to keep track of those populations. Turtle barriers are also a big one. Our team has worked with mass wildlife to kind of identify turtle mortality hotspots along various roadways, bridges through our network, and develop infrastructure to protect those turtles. So oftentimes, projects in these areas will include, specifications to include turtle barriers, and it's seen a really positive impact on turtle populations. And then anytime we're working in turtle habitat, usually we do turtle sweeps, which is this. I haven't had the pleasure of doing one yet, but it's a formal, where we fence off the construction area, and then someone who's trained to do it will walk through and basically find any turtles that may be on site and relocate them. These are some examples of wildlife passage tunnels that we've had on our projects with, game cams to sort of catch their usage. And then just sort of bringing it back to timeline. There's a few things that are really important to know. Wetland delineation is one that it's important to know when this should occur. It depends on the project, how long the project, will take to design and construct, but, typically wetland flagging is only good for 3 years. So we don't want that to occur too early in the process, so that, that wetland flagging is still viable by the time the project goes out to advertise. And again, just kind of harping on the, when we like to see permits versus when we need to know what permits are required. 25% is typically when we want to know exactly what will be needed for the project, and 75 is when we need to know when we need those draft permits. It's so that there's some wiggle room at the end of the design in case the environmental process requires some changes. So in terms of final approval, environmental services, our team kind of gives that final okay before a project can advertise to make sure that, all environmental clearances have been acquired. Sometimes there's, a little bit of a cascading effect where one permit is required before another can be, issued. So it's important to have our team, kind of overseeing that process through the project. I've got some knowledge checks here, but I know we're kind of short for time, so I'll skip through that and just sort of zoom to my email. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. I can also answer any if anyone has any today. Thank you, guys.
Anybody have any questions? Not seeing any, Alex. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
My
especially
pleasure.
for being so patient and waiting and being out of order. So
No worries at all. Yeah, I tried to get through it a little bit quickly, but I hope it was some useful information for you guys.
very useful. Thank you very much.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you everybody for coming today. Hopefully you got some really useful information. We'll be here for a little bit after if you want to talk to us about anything. If you have any general project questions or anything like that, please come and talk to us. And again, thank you so much for today. And we will be sending out the slides after and a very short feedback survey. So thanks again.